Ben Franklin effect. The Ben Franklin effect is one of those strange quirks of human behavior that completely flips our usual logic about relationships. Most people believe that when we like someone, we're more willing to do them a favor. But psychology has found the opposite can also be true. When we do someone a favor, we often end up liking them more. The idea is simple, but the reasoning is surprisingly deep. Our minds want to stay consistent with our actions. If we've already done something helpful for someone, our brain looks for a reason to justify why we would bother. And the easiest explanation it finds is, I must like them. This process is unconscious, which makes it both fascinating and dangerous in the hands of someone who knows how to use it. The name comes from a clever move by Benjamin Franklin himself. Faced with a political rival who disliked him, Franklin didn't try to win him over with gifts, praise, or favors. Instead, he asked to borrow a rare book from him. The rival agreed, perhaps flattered that Franklin valued his library. When Franklin returned the book with thanks, something unexpected happened. The man's hostility faded. Soon they began treating each other with respect and even warmth. The small act of lending a book forced the rival to rewrite his feelings. Why would I help someone I dislike? In his mind, dislike no longer fit the story, so it quietly shifted toward liking. This is why asking for help, something most people avoid out of pride, can actually build bonds faster than offering help yourself. But there's a darker side. Manipulators and persuasive personalities use the Ben Franklin effect as a tool for influence. They start with harmless requests, borrowing a pen, asking for a quick favor, getting you to explain something. These little moments of assistance subtly tie your sense of self to their well-being. Without realizing it, you begin rooting for their success, protecting them, even justifying their flaws, because part of you feels invested in them. And when your emotions get tangled with their outcomes, objectivity disappears. The danger is in how invisible it feels. You don't sense manipulation. You feel generous, kind, and even wise for helping. But each favor, no matter how small, tightens the connection in your mind. Before you know it, someone you barely liked is suddenly someone you defend, support, or even feel loyal to. Not because they changed, but because you acted in a way that made your brain rewrite the story. The Ben Franklin effect isn't about changing who they are. It's about changing the version of them your mind believes in. And once that shift happens, they don't need to win you over, because you've already done the work for them. Triangulation. Triangulation is a psychological manipulation tactic that pulls a third person into a relationship dynamic to create tension, rivalry, or insecurity. On the surface, it may look like harmless comparison or casual name-dropping, but its purpose runs far deeper. At its core, triangulation is about control. The manipulator uses another person, real or imagined, to destabilize you emotionally, to make you question your place, and to force you into competing for their attention or approval. They don't confront you directly. Instead, they plant seeds of doubt and then step back, letting those doubts grow. It often begins subtly. You might notice them mentioning another person's qualities in a way that makes you feel less than. Maybe they praise a co-worker's work in front of you, or casually bring up how considerate an ex used to be. In romantic relationships, they might flirt just enough with someone else to get a reaction, or hint at other people being interested in them. The comparison doesn't need to be explicit. The goal is to make you feel replaceable. Once that feeling sets in, you start working harder to earn back your position, your value, or their affection. In families, triangulation can be used to pit siblings against each other so that a parent stays in control. In workplaces, a manager might praise one employee while downplaying another's contributions, quietly fostering competition so the team never unites. In friendships, it can involve gossiping to one person about another, twisting the truth just enough to keep everyone slightly suspicious of each other. The manipulator thrives in this chaos because while everyone else is distracted by rivalry, no one notices who's actually pulling the strings. What makes triangulation so destructive is the illusion it creates. You begin to see the third person as the problem, the rival stealing your attention or threatening your connection. But the real orchestrator is the person at the center, controlling both sides. They position themselves as the prize, the authority, or the only stable figure in the situation, and because you're caught in an emotional game, you start to rely on their approval more than ever. The more you feel you have to win them back, the more power they hold. And when you finally realize what's happening, the damage has often already been done. Trust is fractured, relationships are strained, and you're left feeling paranoid, defensive, and exhausted. Triangulation isn't about the other person at all. It's about pulling you into a web where the manipulator is the only one who seems safe to cling to, even though they're the one who built the web in the first place. Negative reinforcement loop. The negative reinforcement loop is a psychological trap that conditions you to change your behavior, not because you want to, but because you're desperate to avoid emotional discomfort. Unlike positive reinforcement, which rewards good behavior, negative reinforcement works by taking away something unpleasant when you comply. It's the relief that becomes addictive, not the reward. And in the hands of a manipulator, this cycle can be turned into a powerful form of control. It often starts in small ways. You do something that upsets them. Maybe you disagree, set a boundary, or simply fail to meet their unspoken expectations. Their reaction is swift. Cold silence, subtle criticism, passive-aggressive comments, or outright withdrawal of affection. This isn't random. It's designed to make you feel uneasy, anxious, or even guilty. Then, the moment you back down, apologize, or give in to what they want, their behavior changes. Suddenly, they're warm again. They smile, speak to you normally, maybe even show affection, and just like that, your brain learns the rule. Do what they want, and the discomfort goes away. This cycle is dangerous because it feels like resolution, when in reality it's programming. You start to anticipate their reactions before they even happen. You walk on eggshells, avoid topics, change your tone, and suppress your own needs just to prevent the next wave of coldness or criticism. But here's the trap. The rules keep shifting. What pleased them yesterday might anger them today. You're not meant to win. You're meant to keep chasing peace that only comes when they decide to give it. Over time, your nervous system adapts to this rhythm. Peace no longer feels like the result of healthy connection. It feels like a reward for compliance. And because relief from tension feels so good in the moment, you stop questioning the system entirely. You start to think you're lucky when they're being nice, forgetting that their behavior was the source of the discomfort to begin with. In toxic relationships, whether with a partner, parent, boss, or friend, the negative reinforcement loop quietly erodes your autonomy. It doesn't scream at you to obey. It makes you want to obey just to feel okay. And the most insidious part? You may even thank them for the relief, without realizing that the only reason you needed relief at all was because they made you suffer in the first place. It's not love. It's conditioning. And until you see the pattern, it can feel impossible to break. Intermittent reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement is one of the most addictive psychological manipulation tactics because it's built on unpredictability. Instead of rewarding you consistently for certain behavior, the manipulator gives you affection, approval, or attention at random intervals. You never know when the good will come, which keeps you hooked. Much like a gambler pulling the lever on a slot machine. The uncertainty isn't a flaw in the system, it's the system itself. It usually starts with an intense period of positivity. They shower you with kindness, validation, and connection, making you feel special and secure. Then, without warning, they pull back. The warmth disappears. They become distant, cold, or critical. You're left confused and anxious, trying to figure out what you did wrong. Just when you're about to confront them or pull away, they flip the switch again. Suddenly they're loving, attentive, and everything feels good again. That moment of relief floods you with dopamine, and you cling to it. You convince yourself that this is the real them, and the cold moments were just an anomaly. The truth is, they're training you to tolerate the bad by dangling the good in front of you just enough to keep hope alive. Your brain starts to crave the high of those rewarding moments, and the unpredictability makes it even more powerful. Studies in behavioral psychology show that rewards given on an inconsistent schedule create stronger bonds than those given predictably. In other words, A partner who is sometimes loving and sometimes cruel can create a stronger attachment than one who's consistently kind, because the scarcity of the reward makes it feel more valuable. In relationships, this cycle turns the manipulator into the source of both your pain and your relief. You stop focusing on whether they treat you well overall and start focusing on how to earn the next good moment. The lows become a test you believe you must pass to get back to the highs, and the more you chase those highs, the more control they have over you. The cruelty of intermittent reinforcement is that it hijacks your hope. Even when you logically know the bad outweighs the good, you hold on because you remember how amazing it felt when they were on your side. But that version of them isn't coming back for good. It's only brought out when it serves their control. It's not love. It's a reward system designed to keep you playing a game you can't win, all while believing the jackpot is just one pull away. Covert contracts. Covert contracts are silent agreements that exist entirely in one person's mind, agreements you never knew you were part of, but are punished for breaking anyway. They're built on an unspoken formula. If I do this for you, then you will do that for me. The key is that the that is never actually communicated. It might be loyalty, affection, sex, commitment, or even just recognition. But instead of asking for it openly, the manipulator hides their expectations inside acts of apparent kindness. At first, these gestures look generous and selfless. They might help you with a big task, listen to your problems for hours, or go out of their way to make your life easier. But in the background, they're keeping score. They believe they've earned something from you. And if you don't deliver, resentment begins to build. When the moment comes that you fail to meet their hidden expectation, you won't hear a direct request. Instead, you'll get guilt trips, coldness, or accusations of being ungrateful. You're left wondering what you did wrong, because the deal was never explained in the first place. This tactic is especially common with people who fear rejection or dislike direct confrontation. Asking openly for what they want would risk hearing no, so they choose the covert route, giving you something first, then expecting you to figure out what you owe them. The trap is that it puts you in a no-win situation. If you meet their hidden expectation, you reinforce the behavior and they'll keep using it. If you don't, they'll act hurt or betrayed, and you'll be cast as selfish or cold. The emotional impact can be intense, because you start questioning your own generosity. You may feel pressured to reciprocate things you never agreed to. Over time, this erodes your ability to tell the difference between genuine giving and giving that comes with strings attached. You start to second-guess whether kindness in your life is real or just the opening move in an invisible transaction. What makes covert contracts so corrosive is the betrayal they create on both sides. The manipulator feels betrayed because you broke an agreement you never knew existed. You feel betrayed because the care and help you received wasn't unconditional. It was bait. This isn't genuine generosity. It's emotional blackmail disguised as thoughtfulness. And because the contract exists only in their head, they can always deny it, leaving you to doubt your own perception. The only way out is to recognize that unspoken agreements aren't agreements at all, and real love or kindness doesn't come with a secret invoice waiting to be paid. Foot-in-the-mouth technique. The foot-in-the-mouth technique is a subtle manipulation tactic that works by first creating a small moment of emotional openness, then slipping in a request when your guard is down. It sounds harmless, even friendly, because it often starts with an innocent question like, "How are you doing today?" But behind that warm, casual inquiry lies a calculated strategy to make saying no feel wrong. Here's how it plays out. Someone asks about your well-being, and out of social habit you respond politely, "I'm good," or "I'm fine." In that instant, you've set the stage for their next move. They take your answer as proof that you're in a position to help, comply, or agree. The request comes immediately after, a favor, a concession, or some form of cooperation. Because you've just said you're doing well, and because they've shown concern for you, refusing feels emotionally uncomfortable. It's as if saying no would contradict your own words or make you seem unkind and ungrateful. The brilliance of this technique lies in its ability to bypass your critical thinking and tap straight into social conditioning. Most of us are taught to be polite, helpful, and responsive to those who check in on us. The manipulator knows this and they exploit it. This method doesn't rely on pressure or argument. It relies on your own instinct to match their friendliness with cooperation. The ask doesn't feel like a demand. It feels like a natural next step in a friendly exchange. Salespeople, managers, and even acquaintances can use this without you realizing it. In the workplace, a boss might start a conversation by asking how your week is going, only to follow with, "Glad to hear. Could you stay late to finish this project?" In personal relationships, a friend might check in warmly, then slip in a request for your time, money, or emotional labor. In both cases, the initial small talk isn't about connection, it's about softening you up. What makes this tactic so dangerous is that it hides in plain sight. You feel like you're making a free choice, but everything about the setup makes refusal awkward. If you decline, you risk feeling rude, guilty, or ungrateful. If you agree, you've been steered into compliance without realizing it. Over time, repeated exposure to this method can train you to say yes automatically after moments of friendliness, blending politeness with obligation until you can't easily tell them apart. The foot-in-the-mouth technique is effective because it doesn't look like manipulation, it looks like conversation. But underneath, it's a psychological trap, a small crack in your emotional armor that someone can step through to get what they want, all while making you feel like you opened the door yourself. Reverse psychology. Inversion. Reverse psychology, also called inversion, is a manipulation tactic that works by telling someone the opposite of what you actually want them to do, knowing that their natural urge to resist will push them toward the very choice you intended all along. It's not about giving orders, it's about planting an idea in a way that makes people believe they're acting on their own terms. The brilliance of this technique lies in how it plays on one of the most primal human instincts, the need for autonomy. When people feel like their freedom is being restricted or their choices are being controlled, they often react with reactance, a psychological pushback designed to reassert independence. Reverse psychology exploits this by subtly suggesting that a person either can't or won't do something, making it feel like a challenge to prove otherwise. For example, telling a stubborn friend, "You probably wouldn't like that trip. It's not really your kind of thing," can spark an immediate urge in them to prove you wrong by showing interest. The moment the idea becomes off-limits, it becomes more tempting. In relationships, manipulators use inversion to guide outcomes without appearing to interfere. A partner might say, "You'd never be able to handle a job like that. It's too intense," knowing full well that their words will ignite the drive to prove capability. In sales or negotiations, the same tactic might sound like, "This probably isn't the right product for you," which can make a buyer feel compelled to show that they are in fact the right fit. By making the choice feel like it belongs to the other person, the manipulator sidesteps resistance and maintains deniability. The danger of reverse psychology is its subtlety. If confronted, the manipulator can always claim innocence. "I never told you to do it." This plausible deniability makes it hard to call out without sounding paranoid or overly sensitive. And because the final decision feels self-driven, the person being influenced rarely questions the origin of the impulse. They believe they've taken control when in reality, their independent choice was carefully shaped from the start. The tactic works especially well on people who pride themselves on being independent thinkers, rebels or nonconformists. By feeding their self-image with a carefully placed suggestion, the manipulator can lead them exactly where they want, without resistance. That's the real trap. You don't feel pushed and you feel free. But that freedom is an illusion, designed by someone who understands that the best way to make you do something is to make you think it was your idea all along. Gaslighting by omission. Gaslighting by omission is one of the most insidious forms of psychological manipulation because it doesn't rely on outright lies, it relies on carefully leaving out the truth. Instead of telling you something false, the manipulator simply withholds key information that would give you a clear and accurate understanding of a situation. This partial truth is more dangerous than a blatant lie because it's harder to detect and harder to challenge. You can't point to something they said that was untrue because technically they didn't say anything wrong. But by controlling what you don't know, they control how you think, feel, and react. It often starts with small omissions that seem harmless. Maybe they forget to tell you about a conversation they had, leave out a critical detail about where they were, or avoid mentioning someone who was present during an event. At first, it doesn't seem like a big deal. After all, people leave out details all the time. But with gaslighting by omission, these gaps aren't accidental. They're deliberate. The manipulator curates the narrative, showing you only what benefits them, and hiding anything that would make you question their actions, motives, or honesty. This tactic thrives in emotionally charged relationships, romantic, familial, professional, or even friendships. By omitting crucial details, they make you draw conclusions that favor them. They feed you just enough truth to keep your trust, but not enough to see the full picture. Over time, you start to sense that something's off, but you can't explain why. You might feel paranoid, suspicious, or unsettled, yet there's no concrete evidence to back up your feelings. And when you question them, you're met with deflections. "I didn't think it mattered," or "You're overreacting, I never lied to you." The psychological damage comes from the way this tactic erodes your confidence in your own instincts. You replay events in your head, searching for what you missed, unaware that the missing piece was never given to you in the first place. This constant second-guessing makes you easier to manipulate because you start relying on them to clarify the truth without realizing they're the ones filtering it. What makes gaslighting by omission so dangerous is the way it operates invisibly. The harm happens in the spaces between words, in the information you don't have. The manipulator never has to raise their voice, tell an outrageous lie, or leave obvious evidence. They simply create a version of reality that works in their favor by deciding what you get to know. And when you live in that partial reality long enough, you start to doubt your gut, trust their narrative, and unknowingly surrender your ability to see the truth as it actually is. Semantic infiltration. Semantic infiltration is a psychological manipulation tactic that changes the way you think, not by arguing with your beliefs directly, but by quietly altering the language you use to describe reality. The idea is simple, yet incredibly powerful. If someone can get you to adopt their words, they can also get you to adopt the ideas, assumptions, and emotional associations hidden inside those words. Over time, you stop questioning the premise and start thinking within it, and the most dangerous part is, you won't even notice it's happening. Language isn't neutral. The words we use carry emotional weight, cultural meaning, and subconscious framing. For example, calling a surveillance program a safety measure instantly gives it a protective, positive tone. Referring to an invasion as peacekeeping makes it sound noble. Describing controlling behavior as tough love reframes it as care. Once you accept the word, you often accept the concept it represents, even if you never agreed with it before. This is the heart of semantic infiltration, smuggling in ideas by smuggling in language. Manipulators, propagandists, advertisers, and political leaders all use this tactic. Instead of debating whether their actions are right or wrong, they rename them in ways that make opposition harder. If you reject safety measures, you sound reckless. If you push back on tough love, you seem ungrateful. By controlling the words, they control the emotional playing field. The argument starts with you already on their side, simply because the terms feel familiar and agreeable. In personal relationships, semantic infiltration might look like someone calling your boundaries selfishness, your emotional needs drama, or your independence coldness. The more you hear it, the more those labels start to feel accurate, even if deep down you know they're distortions. Over time, you may stop asserting yourself because you've internalized their language and with it their worldview. This tactic works best when it's subtle and repeated. You hear the words so often that they become normal. They slip into your own vocabulary without you realizing it, and once you start using them, you reinforce the manipulator's framing on yourself. At that point, they no longer need to push their perspective. You've started pushing it for them. What makes semantic infiltration so dangerous is its invisibility. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like communication. But every time you adopt someone else's loaded language, you're taking a step into their reality, where the meanings are already bent in their favor. And once the words are in your mind, they don't just describe the world. They quietly reshape it. Boundary erosion. Boundary erosion is a slow, calculated process where a manipulator gradually wears down your personal limits until you no longer recognize where your no ends and their yes begins. It doesn't usually happen in one bold move. Instead, it unfolds in tiny, seemingly harmless steps that push your comfort zone just a little further each time. Each small breach is easy to overlook, easy to excuse, but over time those small breaches add up to a total loss of control over your own emotional, physical, or mental space. At first, the steps are almost invisible. They might ask for a small favor that feels reasonable, borrow something without asking but promise to return it, or make a light joke at your expense and tell you not to take it so seriously. If you object, they might act surprised or even hurt. I didn't think it was a big deal. The pressure isn't about breaking your boundaries in one go. It's about making you question whether those boundaries were valid in the first place. Once you let one slide, the next becomes easier for them to cross. In relationships, boundary erosion often starts with time and attention. They might expect more of your availability, comment on your appearance in ways that feel slightly off, or make suggestions about who you spend time with. In workplaces, it can look like being asked to just stay a little later or take on one more thing until your job description barely resembles what you signed up for. In friendships, it might mean consistent emotional dumping without reciprocity, until you become their unpaid therapist. What makes this tactic so dangerous is that it's disguised as normal human interaction. Relationships naturally involve give and take, so it's easy to confuse gradual overreach with healthy compromise. But true compromise involves mutual respect, while boundary erosion only benefits the one doing the pushing, and because it happens slowly, you don't notice how much ground you've lost until you're far from where you started. The manipulator relies on your reluctance to make a scene over. Small things. They know you don't want to seem petty, overreactive, or cold. They may even frame your boundaries as selfishness or immaturity, making you feel guilty for protecting yourself. Over time, this guilt can train you to accept discomfort as normal, even necessary for keeping the peace. The real danger is that once your boundaries are eroded, reclaiming them feels harder than setting them in the first place. The people who've benefited from crossing them will resist, accuse, or pressure you to revert back to the more compliant version of yourself. That's why boundary erosion is so effective. By the time you realize what's happened, your limits have been pushed so far back that you have to fight just to get back to zero. Love bombing. Love bombing is a manipulation tactic that overwhelms you with intense affection, attention, and praise in order to create a fast, powerful emotional bond. On the surface, it looks like romance at its purest. Grand gestures, endless compliments, constant communication, and promises of a perfect future together. It feels intoxicating, like you've found someone who truly sees you and values you more than anyone ever has. But beneath the glitter is a calculated goal, to lower your defenses and hook you into dependence before you have time to think critically. It often starts like a whirlwind. They text or call constantly, shower you with gifts, tell you they've never met anyone like you, and paint vivid pictures of the life you'll share. They may say, "I love you," far earlier than seems natural, or insist that the connection you have is fate, destiny, or once in a lifetime. This flood of attention triggers powerful emotional responses, dopamine from the pleasure, oxytocin from the closeness, making you feel bonded in record time. You stop questioning the pace because it feels so good. But the very intensity that feels like love is the trap. Love bombing works because it creates contrast. Once they have your trust and emotional investment, the intensity begins to fade, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly. The gifts stop, the compliments lessen, and the constant attention turns into intermittent reinforcement. You find yourself chasing the high of those early days, doing more and more to win back the version of them who made you feel so special. That early honeymoon wasn't just a phase, it was a setup. In toxic relationships, love bombing is the first stage of a control cycle. After pulling you in with affection, they begin introducing criticism, manipulation, or demands. But by then, you're hooked. You might rationalize their negative behavior because you've seen how amazing they can be. You tell yourself you just need to get back to that place. not realizing that the place was never real. It was a crafted illusion designed to make you dependent. Love bombing doesn't just happen in romance. Cult leaders, manipulative friends, even toxic workplaces can use it. A boss might overwhelm you with praise and opportunity at the start, only to slowly increase demands while reducing recognition. A group might welcome you with warmth and belonging before introducing rules and obligations that keep you tied to them. The danger of love bombing is that it disguises control as devotion. It bypasses the natural process of building trust over time, rushing you into vulnerability before you've had a chance to see the full picture. And once your heart is all in, it becomes much harder to walk away, because you're not just leaving them, you're leaving the dream they convinced you was real. Information withholding. Information. Withholding is a form of manipulation where a person deliberately keeps you in the dark, controlling what you know so they can control what you do. It's not the same as forgetting to tell you something or being naturally private. It's an intentional choice to hide details, facts, or context in order to maintain power over the situation. The manipulator understands that knowledge is leverage, and by filtering what reaches you, they can shape your decisions, limit your options, and keep you dependent on them for clarity. This tactic can appear in countless forms. In relationships, it might be a partner leaving out where they've been, who they've talked to, or what they're planning. At work, a boss might withhold critical project details, then later blame you for not meeting expectations. In friendships, it could mean someone knowing important information that affects you but staying silent, only to reveal it when it benefits them. The effect is always the same. You're operating on an incomplete picture, while they hold the missing pieces. The real danger of information withholding is how it subtly shifts control. When you lack key facts, you're forced to rely on the manipulator for updates, explanations, and decisions. This dependency gives them the upper hand in any disagreement, because they can frame the situation however they want, conveniently leaving out details that might challenge their version of events. And if you ever confront them, they have an easy defense. I didn't lie, I just didn't think it was important to tell you. Over time, the effects can be deeply destabilizing. You might start to doubt your instincts because your conclusions keep turning out wrong, not because you're irrational, but because you were never given the full truth to begin with. You may become hesitant to act on your own, fearing that you'll miss some hidden detail and make the wrong choice. This self-doubt is exactly what the manipulator wants, because it makes you easier to control and less likely to challenge their authority. In more toxic dynamics, information withholding pairs with other tactics like gaslighting and intermittent reinforcement. They create confusion by giving you fragments of the truth, changing the story when needed, or revealing just enough to make you think you understand, while still keeping the crucial context hidden. This way, they can control not just what you do, but how you feel about what's happening. What makes this tactic so effective is that it's invisible until you start connecting the dots. You may not even realize you're being manipulated because you can't see the information you never received, and that's the ultimate power of withholding. The most dangerous lies aren't the ones you're told, but the truths you never get to hear. Guilt tripping. Guilt tripping is an emotional manipulation tactic that uses your own conscience against you. Instead of making a direct request or expressing their needs openly, the manipulator stirs feelings of guilt in you so that you'll act in their favor. It's not about honest communication. It's about making you feel like a bad person if you don't comply. By framing your refusal or independence as selfishness, cruelty, or neglect, they pressure you into doing what they want, all while making it seem like the right thing to do. The process often starts with subtle hints or passive-aggressive comments. They might sigh heavily when you set a boundary, remind you of all they've done for you, or mention how much they sacrifice for your happiness. In more direct cases, they might say things like, "After everything I've done for you, you can't even do this one thing." Or, "If you really cared about me, you'd help me right now." The message is clear. If you don't give in, you're proving yourself to be ungrateful, uncaring, or morally wrong. Guilt tripping works so well because most people have a natural desire to be good, kind, and fair. Manipulators exploit that desire, creating a false moral debt where you owe them something simply because they claim you should. This tactic also feeds on your fear of being misunderstood or seen in a negative light. When the guilt is strong enough, you might give in just to make the uncomfortable feeling go away, even if you know deep down you're being cornered. Over time, repeated guilt trips can train you to automatically prioritize their needs over your own, because the emotional cost of saying no feels too heavy. You start anticipating their disappointment or judgment before it even happens, changing your behavior in advance to avoid the confrontation. This slowly erodes your boundaries and replaces genuine choice with obligation, disguised as morality. In personal relationships, guilt tripping might sound like, "I guess I just mean less to you than your friends do," or "Don't worry about me, I'll be fine alone." In family dynamics, it can take the form of, "We're family. You should be there for me no matter what," as if blood ties erase all personal limits. In the workplace, it can appear when a boss says, "The team is counting on you," as a way to make you work unreasonable hours without complaint. The most damaging aspect of guilt tripping is how it twists kindness into a weapon. You end up giving not out of love, but out of fear of feeling like a bad person. And once this cycle takes root, it can be incredibly hard to break. Because even when you start to see the manipulation, the guilt doesn't disappear. The truth is, saying no to someone's unfair demand doesn't make you unkind. It makes you free. But to a guilt tripper, your freedom will always be framed as selfishness, because their control depends on you never believing that. Push-pull disqualification. Push-pull, also known as disqualification, is a manipulation tactic that keeps you emotionally off balance by alternating between closeness and rejection. One moment, the manipulator draws you in with warmth, attention, and validation. The push that makes you feel wanted and secure. Then, without warning, they shift to the pull by withdrawing affection, criticizing you, or creating emotional distance. This back-and-forth cycle creates a powerful psychological hook because you're constantly trying to get back to the high of the good moments. It often begins in a phase of intense connection. They might compliment you, share personal details, and make you feel special. But just when you start to relax into the relationship, they pull away. The withdrawal can be subtle, less texting, colder tone, delayed responses, or it can be sharp and obvious, like snapping at you, mocking you, or showing sudden disinterest. The sudden shift leaves you wondering what you did wrong, and that uncertainty makes you work harder to win them back. The push stage is addictive because it feels like reward and validation. The pull stage feels like punishment, and your brain starts to associate regaining their warmth with success. Over time, this turns into a form of intermittent reinforcement, where the emotional highs are unpredictable and therefore more addictive. You're no longer just enjoying their affection. You're chasing it, needing it to feel safe in the relationship. Manipulators use this tactic to establish dominance without appearing openly controlling. By creating emotional instability, they keep you focused on their reactions instead of your own needs. You start to measure your worth by how much approval you can get from them in any given moment. The unpredictability keeps you invested because you're convinced that if you just do the right thing, you can make the good version of them stay. In romantic relationships, push-pull might sound like, "I really like you, but I'm not sure if you're my type," or "You're amazing, but I think we should see other people for now." In friendships, it might be a friend who invites you to hang out enthusiastically one week and ignores you the next. In workplaces, it could be a boss who praises you in one meeting and tears you down in the next, keeping you constantly on edge. The long-term effect is emotional dependency. You become so focused on regaining their approval that you lose sight of whether the relationship is even healthy. The manipulator doesn't need to be consistent. In fact, inconsistency is the point. As long as you're stuck trying to decode their moods, you're less likely to notice the imbalance of power. Push-pull isn't about love, friendship, or mentorship. It's about control, disguised as unpredictability, and it works because it makes you crave stability from the one person who's ensuring you'll never have it. Micro-invalidations. Micro-invalidations are subtle, often small remarks or behaviors that dismiss, diminish, or undermine your feelings, experiences, or identity. They're not always blatant insults. In fact, their power comes from their subtlety. These comments can be disguised as jokes, casual observations, or even attempts at reassurance, but underneath, They communicate one clear message: what you feel or who you are isn't valid. Over time, these tiny dismissals chip away at your self-confidence and make you question your own reality. They often happen in passing, almost as if the person didn't mean anything by it. For example, if you open up about being stressed and they respond with, "You're overreacting, it's not that bad," they're not engaging with your emotions, they're erasing them. If you talk about an achievement and they say, "Well, anyone could have done that," they're disqualifying your effort. These statements are small enough to make you doubt whether it's worth being upset, but the cumulative effect is corrosive. In relationships, micro-invalidations might look like dismissing your boundaries with comments like, "You're too sensitive," or "You always make a big deal out of nothing." In workplaces, it might be a manager ignoring your suggestions in a meeting, but later praising someone else for the exact same idea. In friendships, it can be a pattern of subtly mocking your interests, values, or perspectives, making you feel as though you constantly have to defend yourself. One of the most damaging aspects of micro-invalidations is that they can make you feel irrational for being hurt. Because each instance seems small, you might tell yourself you're imagining it, overthinking, or being dramatic. This is exactly why manipulators use them. They can undermine you without giving you a clear attack to confront. If you do speak up, you might be met with, "I was just kidding," or "You're reading too much into it," which further invalidates your experience and paints you as overly emotional. Over time, micro-invalidations can lead to self-doubt, silencing, and emotional numbness. You may stop expressing certain feelings altogether, believing they'll just be dismissed. You may start shrinking yourself in conversations, avoiding vulnerability to protect yourself from being undermined. This quiet erosion of self-expression benefits the manipulator because it makes you easier to control. You're less likely to challenge them when you've been trained to question your own worth. The danger lies in the repetition. One micro-invalidation might roll off your back, but dozens over weeks, months, or years can fundamentally alter how you see yourself. They don't break you in one strike. They wear you down piece by piece until you've learned to expect dismissal. And when dismissal feels normal, genuine validation feels foreign, making it that much harder to leave relationships or environments that thrive on keeping you small. Forced teaming. Forced teaming is a manipulation tactic where someone deliberately uses inclusive language, we, us, our, to create a false sense of shared purpose, trust, or responsibility. It's not genuine teamwork. It's an illusion designed to make you feel like you're on the same side as them, even when your goals, values, or best interests are completely different. By framing a situation as a joint effort, the manipulator blurs boundaries and lowers your natural defenses, making it easier to gain your cooperation. This tactic often starts with language shifts that seem harmless. "We need to stick together on this," or "Our problem is that people don't understand us." That small word, "we," is powerful. It subtly places you in the same boat as the other person, suggesting you share the same stakes and responsibilities. The reality might be that you don't share either, but the emotional weight of belonging to a team can make you more likely to go along with their plans, even if they don't truly serve you. In toxic workplaces, a manipulative boss might say, "We all have to make sacrifices if we want the company to succeed," before assigning you extra work without extra pay. In manipulative friendships, it might sound like, "We're the only ones who really get each other, so we have to have each other's backs," which is then used to justify keeping secrets or covering for bad behavior. In romantic relationships, it might be framed as, "We're in this together, so you shouldn't keep anything from me," while they themselves hide things from you. The emotional hook of forced teaming lies in our natural desire for connection and belonging. Most people want to be part of something larger than themselves, a relationship, a group, a cause. The manipulator leverages that desire, creating a bond that exists more in words than in reality. Once you believe you're part of the same team, you're more likely to sacrifice, compromise, and even overlook red flags, because betraying the team feels wrong. What makes this tactic so effective is that it operates under a positive disguise. Teamwork, unity, and cooperation are generally seen as good things, so being included in a "we" feels comforting. You may even feel flattered that someone sees you as an ally. But the moment that false alliance is used to get you to act against your own needs or values, it becomes clear that the team was never real. It was a control mechanism. Over time, forced teaming can erode your ability to separate your interests from theirs. You may start thinking in terms of we so often that you lose track of what you actually want. And because they frame everything as a shared goal, disagreeing with them feels like betrayal. That's the manipulator's endgame, to make you feel so tied to their mission that you'll keep rowing their boat, even if it's headed straight toward a storm you never agreed to sail into. Minimization. Minimization is a manipulation tactic where someone deliberately downplays the significance of their actions, your feelings, or the harm they've caused. Instead of taking accountability, they make the issue seem small, unimportant, or exaggerated in your mind. The goal is to make you doubt whether your reaction is valid and to discourage you from standing up for yourself. By framing serious matters as no big deal, they shift the focus away from their wrongdoing and onto your supposed overreaction. It often happens in moments when you call out hurtful behavior. You might hear phrases like, "You're making a mountain out of a molehill," "It's not that serious," or "You're too sensitive." In romantic relationships, it can sound like, "I was just joking, you can't take a joke." In workplaces, it might be, "That's just how things are around here," when you point out unethical or unfair treatment. The language of minimization is dismissive by design, framing your concerns as irrational while subtly painting the manipulator as the reasonable one. The danger lies in its psychological impact. When someone repeatedly tells you that what hurt you isn't worth being upset about, you start to second-guess your own emotional responses. Over time, you may suppress your feelings before they even surface, anticipating they'll be dismissed. This emotional self-censorship benefits the manipulator because it keeps you quiet, compliant, and less likely to challenge them. Minimization often works in tandem with gaslighting. By making you question your perception of events, they create a reality where your pain doesn't count. You might find yourself apologizing for even bringing it up, feeling guilty for making them deal with your feelings. This inversion, where you end up feeling bad for holding someone accountable, is the core of why minimization is so effective. In abusive or toxic environments, minimization also serves as a shield for repeated harm. If every harmful act is painted as small or not worth talking about, the pattern itself becomes invisible. You stop seeing each instance as part of a larger problem, which allows the behavior to continue unchecked. And if you ever do try to point out the bigger pattern, they can again minimize it. You're over-analyzing everything. The truth is, the size of the action doesn't determine its impact. A small slight repeated enough times can erode trust just as much as a single big betrayal. Minimization tries to convince you otherwise, that harm only counts if it's massive and obvious. But in reality, the slow, steady erosion of your boundaries and your self-trust is just as damaging, if not more. That's why minimization is more than just a dismissive remark. It's a calculated effort to make you shrink your own truth until it disappears entirely. Future faking is a manipulation tactic where someone makes grand promises about the future, commitments, plans, or dreams, with no genuine intention of following through. It's not about hope or optimism. It's about control. By painting an appealing picture of what's to come, they hook you emotionally in the present, making you invest your time, trust, and energy based on a future that will never actually arrive. It often starts with declarations that feel deeply personal and convincing. In a romantic relationship, they might say things like, "I can't wait to marry you one day," "We'll buy a house together soon," or "Next year we'll take that trip you've always wanted." In the workplace, it could be promises of promotions, raises, or new opportunities that never materialize. In friendships, it might look like constant talk of plans that are always in the works but mysteriously never happen. The purpose of future faking is to keep you emotionally invested right now. You're less likely to question current red flags or walk away if you believe that something better is just around the corner. The manipulator uses your natural hope and your desire for stability or progress as leverage, knowing that you'll endure discomfort in the present for the sake of a brighter imagined tomorrow. This tactic is especially damaging because it manipulates not just your emotions, but your timeline. You might stay in a relationship for years, believing that marriage, moving in together, or some other commitment is just about to happen. You might stay at a job far longer than you should, clinging to the idea that your big break is coming. In both cases, you sacrifice your present for a future that exists only in their words. When confronted, the manipulator often has ready-made excuses. They might say the timing isn't right, circumstances changed, or they need just a little more time. This keeps the hope alive without delivering anything concrete. In some cases, they may offer a small gesture, a token trip, a minor raise, to keep you believing the bigger promise is still on the way. The emotional fallout of future faking can be devastating. Once you realize the promises were empty, you feel not just betrayed but foolish for believing them. Self-blame creeps in, and that shame can make you hesitate to trust others in the future. Worse, if the cycle has repeated enough times, you might still cling to the hope that this time they mean it, prolonging the trap. The truth is, real commitment isn't built on words about the future. It's built on consistent actions in the present. Future faking thrives when you mistake intention for effort and vision for reality. The promises sound beautiful, but until they materialize, they're nothing more than bait on a hook, designed to keep you swimming in someone else's net. Silent treatment. The silent treatment is a form of emotional manipulation where someone deliberately withdraws communication, affection, or acknowledgement in order to punish, control, or pressure you into compliance. It's not simply taking space to cool down. It's a calculated refusal to engage, designed to make you feel isolated, anxious, and desperate to restore the connection. By cutting off interaction, the manipulator shifts all the emotional discomfort onto you, forcing you to take responsibility for fixing the situation, even if you did nothing wrong. It often begins after a disagreement, boundary setting, or any moment where you didn't meet their expectations. Instead of talking it through, they go cold. No texts, no calls, no eye contact, sometimes even acting as if you don't exist in the same room. The silence can last hours, days, or even weeks. The longer it goes on, the heavier the psychological weight becomes. You start questioning yourself. Did I do something wrong? Am I being too sensitive? That uncertainty pushes you toward apologizing or giving in, just to end the unbearable tension. The silent treatment works because humans are wired for connection. Prolonged emotional disconnection triggers distress, similar to physical pain. The manipulator exploits this, knowing that the discomfort will drive you to seek reconciliation, often on their terms, and when you're the one who reaches out, they regain the upper hand. The more often this cycle repeats, the more you become conditioned to avoid behaviors that might trigger their silence, even if it means ignoring your own needs or boundaries. In relationships, the silent treatment can be paired with other tactics like minimization or gaslighting. They may break the silence with accusations that the conflict was your fault or act as though nothing happened, making you feel irrational for being hurt. In workplaces, a boss might use it to freeze you out of important conversations or decisions until you fall back in line. In families, it can be framed as teaching you a lesson for not being obedient or agreeable. One of the most damaging effects is how it trains you to self-censor. The fear of being emotionally cut off can make you avoid honest communication altogether. You start tiptoeing around them, keeping your thoughts, concerns, or feelings to yourself in order to keep the peace. Over time, this erodes your sense of self and creates a one-sided dynamic where their comfort is prioritized over your emotional safety. The danger of the silent treatment is that it can be mistaken for a normal cooling-off period or a personality quirk. But the difference is intent. Healthy space-taking comes with communication. I need time to think. Let's talk tomorrow. The silent treatment comes with weaponized absence, designed not to heal conflict but to win it. And when someone's silence speaks louder than their respect for you, it's not a pause in the relationship. It's a form of control. Moral licensing. Moral licensing is a psychological manipulation tactic where someone uses a good act, either real or exaggerated, as justification for later doing something harmful, unethical, or selfish. The idea is simple. Once they've established themselves as moral, generous, or selfless in your eyes, they believe and want you to believe they've earned the right to behave badly, without being judged as harshly. This creates a mental loophole where their positive action becomes a shield for their negative one. It often works in relationships when someone points to their past kindness or sacrifices to dismiss your concerns about current behavior. They might say things like, "After everything I've done for you, you're really going to complain about this?" Or, "I've been such a good partner. Can't you just let this one go?" By reminding you of their credits in the relationship, they frame your boundaries or criticism as ungratefulness rather than valid concerns. In workplaces, moral licensing might appear when a manager says, "I've given you so much freedom here, so you should be okay with putting in extra hours." Or, "We treated you well during the last project, so we expect you to take one for the team now." In friendships, it can look like someone helping you during a tough time, then later pressuring you into doing something that makes you uncomfortable, as if their earlier help means you now owe them. The tactic is effective because it exploits reciprocity and moral perception. People generally want to be fair and avoid hypocrisy. If someone has done something good for us, we often feel indebted, even when their good act wasn't meant to be repaid in the first place. Moral licensing twists this instinct, making you feel guilty for holding someone accountable because they've already earned a free pass. Over time, this creates a dangerous dynamic. The manipulator learns that they can bank good deeds like currency and spend them whenever they want to cross a line. You may even start questioning your right to be upset because you've internalized the idea that their previous kindness outweighs their current harm. This imbalance keeps you stuck in a cycle where you tolerate more than you should, or because you feel you owe them grace. The most insidious form of moral licensing is when the good act is strategically performed just to create this leverage. The generosity isn't genuine. It's an investment in future control. The manipulator ensures their goodness is visible, even performative, so they can later reference it when they want something or when they're caught doing wrong. The truth is, good behavior doesn't cancel out bad behavior. Past kindness doesn't erase present harm. But moral licensing blurs this truth, making you feel as though criticizing them is unfair, even when their current actions clearly cross the line. And that's exactly what they want. A moral smokescreen thick enough for their wrongdoing to hide in plain sight. Tactical ignorance. Tactical ignorance is a calculated manipulation strategy where someone pretends not to know something, a fact, a rule, a responsibility, or even your boundaries, in order to avoid accountability, delay action, or gain an advantage. This isn't genuine forgetfulness or a lack of knowledge, it's a performance. They act unaware so they can sidestep consequences, force you to repeat yourself or wear you down until you either give up or handle the issue for them. It often begins with small, seemingly innocent lapses. They forget a deadline, misunderstand an agreement, or claim they didn't realize what you expected from them. If you confront them, they respond with wide-eyed innocence. "Oh, I didn't know. Nobody told me," or "I thought you meant something else." The goal is to make you feel like the unreasonable one for holding them to a standard they pretend they weren't aware of. In relationships, tactical ignorance might sound like, "I didn't know that was important to you," after they've crossed a clear boundary you've already discussed multiple times. In workplaces, it could be an employee accidentally skipping critical steps in a process so that you have to fix the problem yourself. In friendships, it can look like someone consistently ignoring your needs or preferences, only to claim, "Oh, I forgot you mentioned that," whenever it benefits them to do so. This tactic is powerful because it flips the emotional labor onto you. Instead of focusing on their behavior, you're suddenly busy clarifying, re-explaining, and justifying your expectations. You waste energy trying to make them understand, when in reality, they already do. They're just pretending not to. Over time, this can make you feel exhausted, frustrated, and more likely to lower your expectations just to avoid the hassle. Tactical ignorance also gives the manipulator plausible deniability. If they're accused of wrongdoing, they can simply say they didn't know. This can make it harder to hold them accountable, especially in group settings where others might give them the benefit of the doubt. The act of not knowing allows them to dodge responsibility while still reaping the benefits of their neglect or wrongdoing. In more toxic scenarios, tactical ignorance is used to deliberately sabotage progress or create dependency. For example, a partner might pretend they don't know how to manage bills, forcing you to take over financial responsibilities, or a coworker might feign confusion about a task so you'll step in and complete it, giving them more free time while you carry the workload. The repeated act of playing dumb isn't incompetence, it's manipulation designed to make you do more and expect less. The most dangerous aspect of tactical ignorance is how convincing it can look. Humans generally assume others are being honest about what they know or don't know. That trust gives manipulators the perfect cover. And because calling it out can make you seem harsh or paranoid, many people simply let it slide, which is exactly what the manipulator counts on. The truth is, repeated ignorance in areas you've already clarified isn't an accident. It's a choice. And once you recognize that choice, you see tactical ignorance for what it really is, not a lack of awareness but a deliberate refusal to take responsibility. Flooding, Chansey overwhelm tactic. The flooding or overwhelm tactic is a manipulation strategy where someone deliberately bombards you with excessive information, demands, emotions, or problems all at once, leaving you mentally and emotionally overloaded. The goal isn't to communicate or resolve anything, it's to overwhelm your ability to think clearly, so you're more likely to agree, comply, or give in without fully processing what's happening. When your brain is flooded, logic and discernment take a back seat, and survival mode kicks in. This tactic often comes in waves. In a conversation, they might speak rapidly, pile multiple accusations together, bring up unrelated grievances and ask loaded questions without giving you time to answer. In relationships, they may dump a torrent of emotional issues on you, guilt, anger, sadness, threats, all in one sitting. At work, it could be a supervisor assigning unrealistic amounts of work at once, demanding updates on multiple projects simultaneously, and interrupting constantly so you can't focus on a single task. The key to this tactic is speed and volume. When you're hit with too much at once, your brain's working memory gets overwhelmed. You start feeling cornered, anxious, and desperate for relief. The manipulator takes advantage of this state by slipping in requests, decisions, or agreements that you might normally reject. They know that when you're overloaded, you'll do almost anything to make the pressure stop, even if it means agreeing to something against your best interest. In personal relationships, flooding often appears during conflicts. Instead of discussing one issue, they bring up every mistake you've ever made, real or imagined. They might say things like, "and another thing," over and over, keeping you on the defensive until you can't keep track of what's being argued. In friendships, it might be a friend who constantly comes to you with every crisis in their life all at once, expecting you to absorb it without boundaries. What makes this tactic so manipulative is that it exploits your natural limits. Everyone has a threshold for how much they can process at once, and flooding pushes you past that threshold deliberately. Once you're past it, you stop thinking strategically and start reacting impulsively. Exactly what they want. And because the flood often contains both truth and distortion, it's nearly impossible to respond effectively in the moment. Over time, repeated flooding can lead to chronic decision fatigue, where you're so used to being overwhelmed that you give in more quickly just to avoid the experience. This benefits the manipulator because it trains you to associate resistance with discomfort and compliance with relief. It's not about winning an argument or resolving a conflict. It's about breaking your mental stamina so you'll stop pushing back. The real danger is that flooding can look like passion, urgency, or just venting, making it hard to recognize as manipulation. But the difference is intent. Healthy communication allows space for processing, while the flooding tactic is about burying you in so much noise that you can't see or fight the bigger game being played. Bait and blame. Bait and blame is a manipulation tactic where someone deliberately provokes you into reacting, the bait, and then uses your reaction as proof that you're the problem, the blame. It's a setup from start to finish. The manipulator creates a situation designed to trigger you emotionally, often in ways that feel deeply personal, and then acts shocked, offended, or morally superior when you respond. Their goal is to shift the focus away from their behavior and onto yours, making you defend yourself instead of addressing what they did. The bait can take many forms. It might be a cutting remark disguised as a joke, a subtle insult about your values, or a repeated action you've already asked them to stop. In relationships, it could be ignoring your boundaries, bringing up sensitive topics in front of others, or making comments they know will hit an old wound. At work, it might be a co-worker deliberately sabotaging a task and then watching how you react under pressure. Whatever form it takes, the bait is carefully chosen to get a rise out of you. Once you react, whether you get angry, frustrated, or emotional, they immediately switch to the blame phase. This is when they say things like, "Wow, you're overreacting. See, this is why we can't talk," or "You're so aggressive." The trap works because they've now flipped the narrative. The conversation is no longer about their initial provocation, but about your supposed overreaction. This puts you on the defensive and makes it harder to call out what they actually did. Bait and blame is particularly dangerous because it erodes your self-control over time. You might start suppressing your feelings to avoid taking the bait, which can lead to resentment, stress, and emotional exhaustion. Or you might become hypersensitive to being provoked, which can make you feel on edge around them, never sure when they'll set the trap again. In both cases, they've created a dynamic where they control the emotional tone of the relationship. This tactic is also a favorite in toxic family systems, where one member consistently provokes another to create a scene, only for the rest of the family to side with the baiter because the reaction looked worse than the initial action. In workplaces, it can be used to undermine someone's credibility by painting them as unprofessional or unstable after intentionally pushing their buttons. What makes bait and blame so manipulative is that it weaponizes your natural emotional responses. Everyone has a breaking point, and manipulators know exactly where yours is. By drawing you into a reaction, they gain the opportunity to play the victim, appear reasonable, and make you question your own behavior. Over time, you might even start to believe their version of events, that you really are the problem, when in reality, you were simply reacting to being deliberately provoked. The truth is, no one can control every emotional reaction they have, but you can control who has access to your triggers. Once you see the pattern of bait and blame, the best defense isn't to fight harder. It's to refuse the bait entirely, no matter how tempting it is to respond. Because in this game, the moment you take the bait, you've already lost in their eyes. Controlled confusion. Controlled confusion is a manipulation tactic where someone deliberately creates uncertainty, ambiguity, or contradictions to keep you disoriented and dependent on them for clarity. The goal is not to genuinely miscommunicate, but to control the flow of information in a way that keeps you guessing, second-guessing, and searching for answers only they can provide. When you're confused, you're easier to influence because your mental energy shifts from making independent choices to simply trying to understand what's going on. This tactic can take many forms. They might give you incomplete or conflicting information, change details without telling you, or rewrite the sequence of events so often that you can't be sure what's real. In conversations, they might jump between unrelated topics, answer questions with more questions, or respond with vague phrases like, "You know what I mean," or "It's complicated." The purpose is to make you feel like you're missing something, and that the missing piece is in their control. In relationships, controlled confusion can look like a partner making plans with you, then later, denying they ever agreed, or claiming they meant something else entirely. At work, it might be a manager giving unclear instructions, then blaming you for not paying attention when the outcome doesn't match their unspoken expectations. In friendships, it can appear as shifting stories about events, half-truths, or explanations that leave you more uncertain than when you ask the question. What makes this tactic so effective is how it subtly undermines your confidence. The more confused you are, the more you start to question your memory, comprehension, and decision-making abilities. This self-doubt makes you more willing to defer to their version of reality because yours feels unreliable. And once they control the version of events you believe, they control your responses to those events. Controlled confusion often works hand in hand with gaslighting. The manipulator may intentionally create a mess of details and then accuse you of remembering wrong or making things up when you try to sort it out. They may even clarify the situation in a way that serves their interests, presenting themselves as the only reliable guide through the chaos they created. Over time, this tactic can wear you down mentally and emotionally. You may become hesitant to question things, fearing you'll be told you're wrong yet again. You might avoid making independent decisions, waiting instead for their direction. This dependency is exactly what they want, a dynamic where you look to them for guidance because the world feels too uncertain without their input. The danger is that controlled confusion can be so subtle that it feels like normal miscommunication. But the difference is intent. Genuine misunderstandings can be cleared up with transparency and effort. Controlled confusion, on the other hand, thrives on keeping things murky, because in the fog of uncertainty, the person who claims to see clearly holds all the power. Identity, undermining. Identity. Undermining is a deep and often covert manipulation tactic where someone systematically attacks, erodes, or distorts your sense of self over time. Instead of challenging one specific action or opinion, the manipulator targets who you are at your core, your values, beliefs, personality traits, and sense of worth. The goal is to weaken your confidence in your own identity so that you become easier to control, more dependent on their approval, and less likely to challenge them. This tactic doesn't usually happen in one dramatic blow. It's often a slow, calculated process that works through repeated small assaults on your self-image. They may start with innocent jokes about your intelligence, appearance, or abilities. They might frame criticism as concern. "I'm just trying to help you see the truth about yourself." Over time, these comments become a steady background noise that wears away your self-assurance. In relationships, identity undermining might look like a partner questioning your life choices, belittling your accomplishments, or subtly mocking the things that make you unique. In family systems, it can take the form of parents or siblings constantly reminding you of mistakes from the past, defining you by your weakest moments. In the workplace, it might be a boss who repeatedly tells you you're not leadership material or implies you're lucky to even have your position. The power of this tactic lies in how it reshapes your self-perception. If you hear something about yourself often enough, especially from someone you trust or love, you may start to internalize it, even if it's not true. This is especially dangerous when the manipulator alternates between praise and criticism. The praise hooks you, giving you a temporary boost, but the criticism drags you back down, making you dependent on their validation to feel good about yourself. Identity undermining often creates a mental trap where you question whether you're capable of making your own choices without their guidance. You might start doubting your career path, your relationships, your abilities, or even your morals, because they've planted seeds of doubt in every area of your life. And when you do try to stand firm in who you are, they may accuse you of being arrogant, stubborn, or delusional, pushing you back into self-doubt. What makes this tactic especially manipulative is that it attacks something fundamental, your core narrative about yourself. If you can be convinced that you're weak, flawed, or broken, you become far more susceptible to control because you no longer fully trust your own judgment. The manipulator then positions themselves as the voice of reason or the person who really knows you, even though they are the one distorting your self-image in the first place. The long-term damage of identity undermining is profound. It can lead to low self-esteem, chronic self-doubt, and a loss of personal direction. People who experience it may feel like they've lost themselves because so much of their identity has been rewritten by someone else's narrative. Rebuilding from this kind of manipulation requires not just setting boundaries with the manipulator, but also reclaiming the right to define who you are, on your own terms. The truth is, no one has the authority to tell you who you are except you. Identity undermining works only if you let their voice become louder than your own. The moment you recognize this tactic, you begin the process of pulling your identity back into your own hands, where it always belonged. Victim playing victim. Playing is a manipulation tactic where someone exaggerates, fabricates, or selectively presents their struggles, pain, or hardships to gain sympathy, avoid accountability, or shift blame. It's not about genuinely seeking help or sharing vulnerability. It's about using the appearance of victimhood as a strategic tool to control how others see them and to influence how others respond. By painting themselves as the one who's been wronged, they position themselves above criticism and make it harder for anyone to challenge their behavior without looking cruel or insensitive. This tactic often emerges when they've done something hurtful or wrong, but instead of addressing it directly, they redirect the focus to how they have been mistreated. For example, if you confront them about a broken promise, they might say, "I can't believe you'd bring this up. After everything I've been through lately," turning your valid concern into an attack on their supposed fragility. In more manipulative cases, they may completely rewrite events to make themselves appear as the innocent party while subtly casting you, or others, as the aggressor. In relationships, victim playing can sound like, "You have no idea how much I suffer because of you," or "You're always making me feel bad, even though I'm the one who's hurting the most." At work, it might be a co-worker who repeatedly fails to do their share, yet claims they're overloaded or being targeted whenever someone tries to hold them accountable. In families, it can look like one member always positioning themselves as the misunderstood martyr, using guilt to silence others and get their way. The effectiveness of victim playing lies in its ability to hijack empathy. Most people have a natural instinct to comfort and protect someone who's in distress. The manipulator exploits this instinct, knowing that if they can make themselves seem wounded enough, others will rush to defend them, even if those wounds are exaggerated or self-inflicted. Over time, this dynamic conditions people around them to tread carefully, avoid confrontation, and prioritize their feelings over fairness or truth. This tactic also serves as a shield against responsibility. By presenting themselves as too hurt or too burdened to be at fault, they avoid consequences for their actions. If someone challenges them, they can accuse that person of being insensitive, uncaring, or even abusive for attacking a victim. This flips the moral script, making the challenger look like the aggressor and the manipulator look like the one in need of protection. The long-term effect of being around a chronic victim player is emotional exhaustion. You may find yourself constantly walking on eggshells, catering to their needs, and feeling guilty for even thinking about your own boundaries. You might also start to doubt your perceptions, wondering if you're being too harsh, or if maybe they are truly as helpless as they claim. The truth is, real victims seek healing and resolution, not endless cycles of pity and avoidance. Victim playing is not vulnerability. It's control disguised as suffering. And while compassion is important, it must be paired with discernment. Otherwise, you risk becoming an audience member in someone's endless performance, trapped in a story where they are always the hero's opposite, the perpetual untouchable victim. False consensus trick. The false consensus trick is a manipulation tactic where someone makes it seem like everyone thinks or feels a certain way, and that you're the odd one out if you disagree. It's a psychological shortcut designed to pressure you into conformity by making you believe that your opinion is in the minority, even when that's not true. By framing their view as the normal or popular one, they tap into your natural desire to fit in and avoid social rejection. This tactic can be as subtle as casual comments like, "Well, everyone knows that's how it is," or as pointed as, "Nobody else had a problem with it, so why do you?" In group settings, they might say things like, "We all agree this is the best option, even if no actual consensus has been reached." The idea is to create the illusion that your perspective is unusual or unreasonable, making you more likely to doubt yourself and align with the supposed majority. In relationships, this might sound like, "All my friends think you're overreacting," or "Most people would have no issue with what I did." At work, a manager might say, "Everyone on the team supports this decision," when in reality, they've only spoken to one or two people, or none at all. In families, it can show up as, "Everyone else in the family thinks you're being selfish," which immediately isolates you and makes you feel like the outcast. The trick works because humans are wired for social belonging. Throughout history, being part of the group meant safety and survival, so our brains evolved to avoid standing out too much. The manipulator exploits this instinct, making you fear that disagreeing will lead to disapproval, alienation, or conflict. Even if you're confident in your opinion, the suggestion that everyone disagrees can create a subtle pressure to stay quiet or fall in line. What makes the false consensus trick especially dangerous is that it doesn't require any proof to be effective. The manipulator doesn't need to show you actual evidence of agreement. The mere claim of widespread support can be enough to make you second-guess yourself. And if you try to verify it, they might accuse you of being paranoid, distrustful, or confrontational, which further discourages you from challenging the claim. Over time, repeated exposure to this tactic can chip away at your confidence and independence. You may start to assume that if your view differs from theirs, you must be wrong or unreasonable. This can lead to self-censorship, going along with decisions you don't truly support, and even reshaping your beliefs to match what you think the group believes, even when that group consensus is completely fabricated. The truth is, genuine consensus is rare, and people's opinions are often far more varied than manipulators want you to believe. The false consensus trick thrives on the illusion of agreement, and the moment you question that illusion, its power begins to fade. Recognizing it allows you to step back and ask, who actually agrees with this? And if I'm the only one who disagrees, does that automatically make me wrong? In many cases, the answer is no, and that's exactly what the manipulator doesn't want you to realize. Deliberate misinterpretation. Deliberate misinterpretation is a manipulation tactic where someone intentionally twists your words, tone, or meaning to suit their own agenda. Instead of engaging with what you actually said, they reframe it in a way that makes you look unreasonable, aggressive, or wrong, all while positioning themselves as the misunderstood or rational party. The goal is to derail the original point, force you into defending something you never meant, and ultimately take control of the conversation. This tactic can show up in subtle or blatant ways. You might say, "I'm frustrated with how things were handled," and they respond with, "So you're saying I'm completely incompetent?" Or you might say, "I need more space right now." And they twist it into, "You're abandoning me." Instead of acknowledging your actual words, they project their own exaggerated interpretation onto them, forcing you to fight against a distorted version of your statement. In relationships, deliberate misinterpretation might look like twisting a comment about boundaries into an accusation that you don't care or are trying to control them. At work, a colleague could reframe your constructive feedback as a personal attack, telling others you were being hostile. In friendships, it could be a friend taking a harmless remark out of context and using it to start drama or turn others against you. The effectiveness of this tactic lies in how it changes the battleground. Once they've misinterpreted you, you're no longer talking about your original point. You're defending your character, intentions, or tone. This shifts the power dynamic in their favor because the original issue gets buried under the weight of proving you're not what they say you are. And even if you manage to clarify, the emotional energy you've spent defending yourself leaves you with less strength to return to your original argument. Deliberate misinterpretation is often used alongside other tactics like gaslighting or bait and blame. They may pretend your words hurt them deeply when, in reality, their reaction is exaggerated to shut you down. They can also use it publicly, reframing what you said in front of others so you look like the unreasonable one, knowing that not everyone will take the time to fact-check the truth. Over time, repeated exposure to this tactic can make you hesitant to speak openly. You might start over-explaining, watering down your statements, or avoiding certain topics entirely to prevent them from twisting your words. This is exactly what the manipulator wants, for you to silence yourself so they can dominate the narrative without resistance. The truth is, misinterpretations happen naturally in everyday communication, but deliberate misinterpretation is different because it's intentional and strategic. The signs are in the pattern. The same person repeatedly takes your words in the worst possible way, especially when it benefits them to do so. Once you see the pattern, you can start setting firm boundaries, refusing to argue about their distorted version, and instead returning to your original point over and over until they have no room left to twist it. Anchoring negative emotions. Anchoring negative emotions is a manipulation tactic where someone deliberately links you, your presence, your actions, or even just the thought of you, with unpleasant feelings like fear, guilt, shame, or anxiety. Over time, This emotional pairing conditions you to feel bad in their presence or about yourself, even when you've done nothing wrong. It's a form of psychological conditioning, similar to how a certain smell or song can trigger a memory, except here the trigger is crafted intentionally to control how you feel and respond. The manipulator does this by repeatedly associating you with criticism, disappointment, or conflict. For example, they might choose to bring up stressful topics only when you're around, so you subconsciously begin linking their negative tone to your arrival. They might sigh heavily when you walk in, give you disapproving looks, or save bad news for moments when you're already vulnerable. The goal is to make your presence synonymous with discomfort. In relationships, this might look like a partner who consistently criticizes you right after you share something you're proud of. Over time, your brain starts to anticipate the criticism whenever you open up, making you share less. In friendships, it could be a friend who constantly delivers gossip, complaints, or drama when they see you, so you leave every interaction feeling drained. At work, it might be a manager who only calls you into their office to scold you, never to acknowledge your successes. Eventually, just hearing your name called makes you feel anxious. The effectiveness of this tactic lies in how the human brain connects emotional states to triggers, even without conscious thought. If someone repeatedly pairs you with negative emotional experiences, your body starts reacting before your mind has time to reason it out. You might feel tense before you even know why. This gives the manipulator power, because once that link is established, they can control your mood and behavior simply by showing up or signaling disapproval. Anchoring negative emotions also primes you to self-edit in their presence. If you know certain topics or actions tend to trigger their disapproval, you'll avoid them, not because they asked you to, but because your brain has learned to dodge the discomfort. This can lead to walking on eggshells, second-guessing yourself, and gradually shrinking your authentic self to avoid setting off that emotional alarm. The tactic is especially insidious because it can be masked as just how they are, or even passed off as your own sensitivity. They might say, "You're reading too much into it," or "You always take things personally," when in reality they've been deliberately reinforcing this emotional link over time, and if you try to address it, the conversation often circles back to you being too emotional, further anchoring the negative feelings. The long-term impact can be profound. You may start associating your own self-worth with negativity, internalizing the idea that being around you naturally causes tension or conflict. This isn't just manipulation, it's emotional conditioning that can follow you into other relationships if left unrecognized. Breaking free from this tactic requires deliberately creating new emotional associations for yourself. That means spending time with people who uplift you, engaging in activities that build confidence, and refusing to let someone's engineered disapproval define how you see yourself. Because the truth is, no one should hold the power to make your presence feel like a burden, especially not on purpose. Ingratiation. Ingratiation is a manipulation tactic where someone goes out of their way to flatter, compliment, or align themselves with you in order to gain your trust, favor, or influence. But their kindness isn't genuine. Instead of being a natural expression of admiration or respect, it's a calculated performance meant to make you more receptive to their requests or more forgiving of their flaws. They're not trying to connect with you. They're trying to win you over so they can benefit later. At first, ingratiation can feel like harmless friendliness. They might shower you with praise, agree with all your opinions, or constantly highlight your strengths in front of others. They may ask lots of personal questions, appear deeply interested in your stories, and act as though they value your perspective above all else. But the key difference between genuine rapport and ingratiation is intent. With ingratiation, the charm has an expiration date that ends the moment they've gotten what they want. In relationships, ingratiation can appear in the early stages as love bombing, intense compliments, romantic gestures, and constant validation that feels intoxicating. But once your guard is down, the dynamic shifts, and the manipulator begins making requests or pushing boundaries they expect you to overlook because they've been so good to you. In workplaces, it might be a coworker who constantly praises your skills or agrees with all your ideas until they need your help on a project or want you to cover for them. In friendships, It could be someone who always builds you up in conversation but disappears when they have nothing to gain. The effectiveness of ingratiation lies in its ability to bypass skepticism. When someone makes us feel valued and admired, our defenses naturally drop, and we become more open to cooperation. Compliments trigger positive emotions, and those emotions can make it harder to critically evaluate the other person's motives. The manipulator knows this, so they carefully calibrate their praise to keep you feeling seen and appreciated, just enough to keep you hooked. One of the most telling signs of ingratiation is inconsistency. The same person who treats you like a star when they need something may suddenly become distant, critical, or uninterested when you have nothing to offer them. Over time, this hot and cold pattern can create a cycle where you start seeking their approval again just to get back to that initial warmth, without realizing you're chasing a performance, not genuine connection. Ingratiation is also effective when combined with other tactics. For example, after they've crossed a line, they might revert to over-the-top flattery as a way to smooth things over without truly addressing the issue. Or they might ingratiate themselves with people around you, friends, family, co-workers, to build a network of allies that makes you less likely to challenge them openly. The long-term danger of ingratiation is that it can blind you to red flags. When you feel liked, supported, and admired, you're less likely to question whether the relationship is balanced or whether their intentions are pure. This leaves you vulnerable to exploitation because you've been conditioned to associate their charm with safety. The truth is, genuine praise and appreciation don't come with strings attached. If someone's compliments or alignment always seem to coincide with their needs, it's worth asking whether you're being appreciated for who you are or groomed for what they want from you. Emotional blackmail. Emotional blackmail is a manipulation tactic where someone uses your feelings, especially guilt, fear, obligation, or love, as leverage to make you do what they want. It's not about open, honest persuasion. It's about putting you in an emotional chokehold where saying no feels like betrayal, cruelty, or a sign that you're a bad person. The manipulator doesn't have to physically force you. They make you believe the emotional cost of refusing them is too high to bear. At its core, emotional blackmail operates on an unspoken threat. If you don't give me what I want, I will make you suffer emotionally, or I will make you feel responsible for my suffering. This could take the form of withdrawal of affection, sulking, guilt-tripping, or even threatening self-harm. In some cases, it's more subtle: a look of disappointment, a dramatic sigh, or a sudden coldness that makes you feel you've done something terribly wrong. In relationships, emotional blackmail might sound like, "If you really loved me, you'd do this for me," or "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me." In friendships, it can be framed as, "I guess I know where I stand with you," after you set a boundary. In workplaces, it might be a boss implying, "If you don't stay late, you're letting the whole team down." The tactic works by triggering deep emotional reflexes, fear of abandonment, guilt over perceived selfishness, or anxiety about conflict. The danger of emotional blackmail is that it trains you to avoid certain emotional discomforts at the cost of your own autonomy. Every time you give in, you reinforce the manipulator's belief that this method works, and they'll use it again, often escalating over time. Eventually, you may find yourself doing things you deeply disagree with, simply because you can't bear the guilt or emotional fallout of saying no. One of the most toxic aspects of emotional blackmail is that it can be disguised as vulnerability. They may present themselves as fragile, hurt, or broken, making it seem cruel not to comply. But true vulnerability seeks connection and understanding, while emotional blackmail uses vulnerability as a weapon. The difference is intent. One invites mutual care, the other demands compliance under emotional duress. Over time, emotional blackmail can erode your sense of self. You start to measure your worth by how well you keep the other person happy, rather than by your own values or needs. It also creates an unhealthy dynamic where the manipulator's emotions take priority over your well-being, leaving you drained, resentful, and unsure where your boundaries even are anymore. The truth is, love, loyalty, and care should never come with a price tag of emotional submission. If someone's affection, friendship, or respect hinges on you constantly sacrificing your needs to meet theirs, it's not a healthy bond. It's control wrapped in the language of connection. Recognizing emotional blackmail for what it is the first step to breaking free from its grip. Once you see the pattern, you can start protecting your boundaries and refusing to let someone weaponize your empathy against you. Feigning ignorance. Feigning ignorance is a manipulation tactic where someone pretends not to know or understand something they actually do in order to avoid responsibility, delay action, or place the burden of work and explanation on you. It's not genuine confusion. It's a calculated act of playing dumb to sidestep accountability or make you step in and handle things for them. The power of this tactic lies in the fact that most people will give others the benefit of the doubt, assuming mistakes or misunderstandings are accidental rather than deliberate. The manipulator may use feigned ignorance to escape blame. If confronted about hurtful behavior, they might say, "Oh, I didn't realize that would upset you," even after you've told them multiple times. If they fail to complete a task, they might insist, "I didn't know how to do it," despite having been trained or shown before. In relationships, it can show up as repeatedly forgetting boundaries you've made clear or acting unsure about commitments they've already agreed to, forcing you to re-explain and renegotiate over and over. In workplaces, feigning ignorance can be especially damaging. A co-worker might deliberately avoid learning a process so that you're the one who always has to take over. Or they might claim they weren't told about a deadline, even though the information was clearly communicated. This creates a dynamic where they reap the benefits of your effort without contributing equally, all while maintaining the image of innocence. Feigning ignorance works because it shifts the burden of proof and effort onto you. Instead of focusing on what they didn't do, the conversation becomes about whether they really knew or understood. This not only derails the original issue, but also drains your time and energy as you try to help them understand something they've already grasped perfectly well. Over time, this can condition you to lower your expectations, thinking it's easier to just do it yourself rather than fight the same battle repeatedly. A more insidious version of this tactic is when the manipulator uses feigned ignorance to push boundaries in subtle ways. They might say, "I didn't realize this was such a big deal," after making a deeply personal or invasive comment, forcing you to explain again why it was inappropriate. This approach allows them to probe your limits without taking responsibility, all while gathering information on what you'll tolerate. The problem is that repeated ignorance in the same areas isn't forgetfulness, it's avoidance. Genuine mistakes lead to learning and adjustment, but feigned ignorance is a choice. It thrives in environments where confrontation feels uncomfortable, because calling it out risks making you seem harsh or unforgiving. That hesitation is exactly what they rely on. Breaking the cycle means recognizing patterns. If someone consistently doesn't know or forgets the same things, especially when it benefits them, it's not an accident. The best defense is to document what's been communicated, set firm boundaries, and refuse to take on the extra labor their act creates. Because the truth is, feigned ignorance isn't harmless. It's a subtle but effective way of making you carry the weight they don't want to bear. Preemptive invalidation. Preemptive invalidation is a manipulation tactic where someone dismisses, undermines, or ridicules your thoughts, feelings, or opinions before you even have the chance to fully express them. It's a way of cutting off your credibility at the root, making it seem as though anything you say is already flawed, exaggerated, or not worth taking seriously. This tactic is designed to discourage you from speaking up and to maintain control over the narrative by ensuring your perspective never gains ground. The manipulator might start with phrases like, "I already know what you're going to say and it's ridiculous," or "Don't start, you're just overreacting again." Sometimes it's disguised as humor. "Here comes another one of your wild theories," or "Oh boy, here we go." The key element is that they frame your contribution as invalid before it's even been heard. This way, the conversation is primed for others to dismiss it too, or for you to question whether it's even worth sharing. In relationships, preemptive invalidation might look like a partner rolling their eyes and saying, "You're going to make a big deal out of nothing, as usual," when you try to address a concern. At work, a colleague might interrupt with, "I can already tell this idea won't work," before you've even explained it. In family settings, it can be a parent saying, "You always blow things out of proportion," as soon as you begin to speak about something important to you. The power of this tactic lies in its ability to plant self-doubt. When someone you interact with regularly always meets your input with dismissal, you start questioning yourself before you even speak. You might think, maybe they're right, maybe I am overreacting, and choose silence over self-expression. Over time, this not only erodes your confidence, but also gives the manipulator greater control over the conversation, since they've effectively silenced one of the voices in the room, yours. Preemptive invalidation is often paired with other tactics like gaslighting or minimization. By dismissing your feelings before they're voiced, the manipulator avoids having to actually engage with the content of what you're saying. They don't have to prove you wrong if they can make your words seem irrelevant from the start. One of the most insidious effects of preemptive invalidation is how it conditions you to edit yourself. You may start altering your tone, softening your points, or avoiding certain topics altogether just to avoid that immediate dismissal. This keeps you trapped in a cycle where your needs and perspectives are never fully acknowledged, which is exactly what the manipulator wants. The truth is, nobody can genuinely know the full value or validity of your thoughts before they hear them. Preemptive invalidation isn't a sign that your ideas lack merit. It's a sign that the other person fears what might happen if they allow them to be fully heard. The best defense is to recognize the pattern, refuse to be shut down prematurely, and calmly insist on finishing your thought. Because silencing you before you speak isn't dialogue, it's control. Cognitive load disruption. Cognitive load disruption is a manipulation tactic where someone deliberately overwhelms your mental processing capacity so you can't think clearly, make sound decisions, or challenge what they're saying. By flooding your mind with too much information, conflicting messages, or urgent demands, they create mental fatigue that makes you more compliant and easier to influence. The tactic works because the human brain has limits. Once your mental bandwidth is maxed out, your ability to critically evaluate a situation drops sharply. This can be done in obvious ways, like talking at a rapid pace, throwing multiple arguments at you at once, or constantly switching topics so you can't keep track of the conversation. It can also be more subtle, burying important details in long, confusing explanations, or providing so many options that you feel paralyzed trying to sort through them. In high-pressure situations, they might combine this overload with a demand for an immediate decision, knowing that mental exhaustion will push you toward the easiest, and often most favorable to them, choice. In relationships, cognitive load disruption might look like a partner bombarding you with grievances all at once, so you can't address any single one effectively. In the workplace, it could be a manager, drowning you in shifting priorities and contradictory instructions, then holding you accountable for failing to meet unclear expectations. In negotiations, it's a common tactic to bury unfavorable terms in long, dense contracts, knowing most people won't have the energy or clarity to catch them all. The effectiveness of this tactic lies in decision fatigue. Just like your body tires after physical exertion, your mind tires after processing too much at once. Once you're overloaded, you're more likely to agree, comply, or let things slide simply because you don't have the mental energy to resist. The manipulator's advantage is that they can keep their own cognitive load light. They've planned their approach, while you're stuck reacting in real time. Over time, repeated exposure to cognitive load disruption can make you feel chronically off balance in the manipulator's presence. You may start doubting your ability to keep up, believing you're bad at processing, or too slow to understand, when in reality, the environment is being engineered to keep you overwhelmed. This self-doubt makes it even easier for them to control the pace and direction of conversations. One of the most dangerous aspects of this tactic is that it often appears in high-stakes moments, when signing agreements, resolving conflicts, or making commitments. The manipulator knows that your best defense is a clear mind, so they actively work to cloud it. This might involve mixing emotional appeals with rapid information dumps, interrupting your thought process with unrelated tangents, or constantly reframing the discussion so you can't find stable ground. The best way to counter cognitive load disruption is to slow the pace and reclaim control of the conversation. This means refusing to make immediate decisions when you feel overloaded, breaking down issues one at a time, and asking for written clarity when instructions or explanations feel overwhelming. Recognizing that mental overload is being used as a tactic is the first step in protecting yourself, because once you name it, you can step out of the whirlwind and think on your own terms. Comparative devaluation. Comparative devaluation is a manipulation tactic where someone diminishes your worth, achievements, or qualities by constantly comparing you to others in a way that makes you feel less than. The comparisons are never meant to inspire or encourage you. They're strategically framed to lower your confidence, make you doubt yourself, and create a sense that you will never measure up. Over time, this erodes your self-esteem and can make you dependent on the manipulator's approval, even though they are the very source of your insecurity. This tactic can be overt, like blunt statements, "Why can't you be more like them?" or "They're way more successful than you." It can also be subtle, wrapped in backhanded compliments, such as "You're good, but they're just naturally better," or "You did well, though not quite at their level." Sometimes it's delivered indirectly, praising someone else in your presence over and over until the implication is clear. You don't measure up. In relationships, comparative devaluation might look like a partner frequently mentioning how their ex was more attractive, more ambitious, or more exciting. In families, it can be a parent constantly holding up siblings or relatives as the gold standard, making you feel like a perpetual disappointment. In workplaces, it could be a boss who praises a colleague's performance in front of you while overlooking your own accomplishments, subtly implying you're replaceable. The effectiveness of this tactic lies in its ability to activate insecurity and competition. By framing others as better, the manipulator positions themselves as the gatekeeper of approval, and you as someone who must work harder to earn it. This keeps you striving, not for your own growth, but for their acknowledgement. It also creates an emotional environment where you're too busy comparing yourself to others to notice the manipulator's own shortcomings or questionable motives. Comparative devaluation often works hand in hand with other tactics, like intermittent reinforcement. They may occasionally give you high praise, just enough to keep you hooked, before returning to comparisons that tear you down. This hot and cold pattern can be deeply destabilizing because you start chasing the rare moments of validation while enduring constant criticism. Over time, being on the receiving end of this tactic can reshape your self-perception. You might begin to see yourself only in relation to others, measuring your value against external standards instead of your own progress. You may also feel resentment toward those you're compared to, even when they've done nothing wrong, because the manipulator has positioned them as rivals in a game you never agreed to play. The truth is, healthy comparisons can be motivating, but manipulative comparisons are designed to control, not inspire. They keep you feeling inadequate, so the manipulator can maintain power over your self-image. Recognizing this pattern is crucial. The antidote is to shift your focus away from competing for someone else's approval and toward defining your worth on your own terms. Because in reality, no one else's path diminishes yours unless you let their comparisons dictate how you see yourself. Idealization, devaluation, discard cycle. The idealization, devaluation, discard cycle is a manipulative relationship pattern often seen in toxic dynamics, where someone first puts you on a pedestal, then systematically tears you down, and finally abandons or replaces you, only to sometimes repeat the cycle again. It's an emotional roller coaster engineered to keep you off balance, dependent and desperate for the good version of the relationship to return. The cycle begins with idealization. At this stage, the manipulator showers you with praise, attention, and affection. They make you feel special, unique, and valued in a way you may have never experienced before. In romantic situations, this can feel like intense love bombing, constant messages, extravagant compliments, and declarations about how perfect you are together. In friendships or work settings, it might look like excessive flattery, public recognition, or sudden deep interest in your life. This stage hooks you emotionally, creating trust and attachment. Then comes devaluation. Once you're emotionally invested, the tone changes. The same traits they once adored now become flaws they criticize. Instead of praising you, they find fault in your actions, appearance, or decisions. The compliments dry up, replaced with sarcasm, nitpicking, or silent disappointment. They may compare you unfavorably to others, withhold affection, or become emotionally distant. This stage is destabilizing because you're left wondering what you did wrong and how to fix things. You start working harder to regain the approval you had during the idealization phase. Finally, there's discard. When you're sufficiently worn down, or when they've extracted what they wanted, they abruptly pull away. This can be a complete ending, where they cut off contact entirely, or a partial withdrawal, where they keep you around, but only on their terms. Sometimes the discard is cruel and public, other times it's quiet, leaving you confused and searching for closure. The goal is to leave you feeling powerless and questioning your worth. What makes this cycle so damaging is the way it plays on emotional conditioning. Your brain becomes addicted to the highs of the idealization stage, so you tolerate the lows of devaluation in the hope of getting back to the beginning. This intermittent reward system is one of the most powerful behavioral hooks in psychology. It keeps you chasing validation long after the relationship has turned toxic. The cycle doesn't always end with discard. In many cases, the manipulator will return, offering just enough warmth to restart the idealization phase, pulling you back in. Each time, the cycle tends to become shorter and harsher, with less idealization and more devaluation, until your self-esteem is completely eroded. Breaking free from the idealization, devaluation, discard cycle requires recognizing that the idealization phase wasn't a true reflection of who they are or how they value you. It was bait. The devaluation wasn't about your flaws, but about their need for control, and the discard wasn't a reflection of your worth, but a strategic move in their pattern of manipulation. Once you see the cycle for what it is, you can step off the emotional roller coaster and begin rebuilding your self-worth outside of their approval. Plausible deniability. Framing. Plausible deniability framing is a manipulation tactic where someone deliberately creates ambiguity in their words or actions so they can deny wrongdoing if confronted. They structure their communication, behavior, or commitments in a way that leaves them an escape hatch, a built-in excuse that allows them to claim, "That's not what I meant," or "You misunderstood me." This way they can engage in shady, manipulative, or hurtful behavior without taking responsibility for it. The power of this tactic lies in the gray areas. They rarely speak in clear, absolute terms. Instead, they use vague language, half promises, and suggestive statements that can be interpreted multiple ways. If you try to hold them accountable, they retreat to the safest interpretation of their words, the one that makes them look innocent. The result is a frustrating cycle where they benefit from the impact of their actions but escape the consequences. In relationships, plausible deniability might look like a partner flirting with someone else but claiming, "I was just being friendly, you're overreacting." In workplaces, it could be a boss making verbal promises about raises or promotions but never putting anything in writing. So when the time comes, they can say, "I never said that exactly." In friendships, it might be someone making a cutting remark and then claiming, "I was only joking." This tactic is especially effective because it makes you question your own interpretation. When faced with their denial, you might wonder if you really did misunderstand, if you're being too sensitive, or if you're imagining malice where there was none. Over time, this self-doubt can weaken your ability to call out their behavior at all, because you anticipate the gaslighting pushback before it even happens. Plausible deniability is often paired with manipulative framing. They might present an idea in a way that subtly pressures you into agreeing, but if you later push back, they claim they never pressured you. You chose it freely. It's a way of maintaining power without leaving clear evidence of coercion. The danger of this tactic is that it erodes trust while maintaining a false appearance of innocence. They can maintain their social image, avoid conflict with authority figures, and keep you in a state of uncertainty, all while continuing the same behavior. And because their denials often sound reasonable on the surface, outsiders may side with them, leaving you feeling isolated and unheard. The best way to protect yourself from plausible deniability framing is to seek clarity early and often. Ask for specifics, get agreements in writing, repeat back your understanding, and ask for confirmation. This forces them to commit to a version of events that can't easily be rewritten later. And most importantly, remember that a pattern of conveniently misunderstood mistakes is rarely innocent. It's a strategy. When someone constantly operates in the shadows of vague language and ambiguous actions, it's not about miscommunication, it's about control. And the more you insist on clarity, the less room they have to hide behind their carefully crafted deniability. Truth sandwich technique. The truth sandwich technique is a communication strategy that can be used both ethically and manipulatively. In its healthy form, it's meant to deliver difficult information in a way that softens the blow. Use sandwich criticism or a negative statement between two positive or affirming ones. For example, "You've been doing great with deadlines. I do need you to correct this." Report, "But overall your work this month has been impressive." This framing makes feedback easier to accept and less likely to trigger defensiveness. However, in manipulative hands, the truth sandwich technique becomes a way to disguise harmful intent, subtly influence your perception, or make you more likely to accept something you'd normally reject. A manipulator might lead with something that feels reassuring or flattering, slip in a lie, distortion, or self-serving suggestion in the middle, and then close with another positive statement, so the negative core is easier to swallow. The comforting bread makes the filling, the manipulative part, feel less threatening. In relationships, a partner might say, "You're the most important person to me. I just don't think you're smart enough to handle our finances. But you're still the most loving and caring person I know." The praise at the beginning and end makes the cutting remark in the middle feel less confrontational, even though it's deeply undermining. At work, a boss could open with, "We really value you here," then insert, "We'll need you to take on more hours without extra pay," and close with, "Your dedication is truly inspiring." The structure makes the exploitation seem more palatable. The tactic works because of how human memory and emotion process information. We tend to remember the first and last things we hear more vividly than the middle, a cognitive bias called the serial position effect. By placing the manipulative or negative content in the middle, the person delivering it increases the chance that you'll leave the interaction feeling more positive than you should, because the outer layers frame your emotional takeaway. When used manipulatively, the truth sandwich technique can also make you second-guess your instincts. If someone says something hurtful or controlling, but it's surrounded by warmth and compliments, you might think, "Maybe I'm overreacting. They were mostly kind." This blurring of emotional signals makes it harder to identify the manipulation for what it is. The danger of this tactic is that it can slowly normalize harmful messages. If you get used to hearing negative or limiting beliefs about yourself wrapped in praise, you might start accepting the filling without realizing the damage it's doing. Over time, your self-image can be shaped by the repeated exposure to those subtle middle statements, even though they're hidden between kindnesses. The best way to guard against manipulative use of the truth sandwich technique is to focus on the content of the middle, the filling, regardless of how sweet the bread is. Ask yourself, if I heard just that middle part without the praise around it, how would I feel? If the answer is hurt, diminished, or pressured, then the positive framing is a distraction, not a sign of genuine care. When used ethically, this technique can be a compassionate communication tool. When used manipulatively, it's a way of sneaking toxic messages past your defenses. The difference lies in intent, and in whether the sandwich is nourishing or just sugar-coated poison. Gaslighting by proxy. Gaslighting by proxy is a particularly insidious form of psychological manipulation where someone enlists others, intentionally or indirectly, to help make you doubt your own memory, perception, or sanity. Instead of the manipulator gaslighting you directly, they involve third parties who reinforce their distorted version of events. These proxies may be willing participants who believe the manipulator's lies, or unwitting allies who repeat their narrative without realizing they're part of the manipulation. This tactic allows the manipulator to distance themselves from the gaslighting, making it harder for you to directly challenge them. If you confront the manipulator, they can claim innocence. "I didn't say that, they did," or, "If other people saw it the same way, maybe you're the one." Misremembering. By triangulating through others, they create a sense of social pressure that makes you question your own reality even more strongly. In relationships, this might look like a partner telling mutual friends a distorted story about an argument, painting you as irrational or overly sensitive. Then, when you interact with those friends, they subtly echo the manipulator's framing. Maybe you did overreact, or that's not how we heard it happened. At work, a boss could complain to colleagues that you're unreliable, so when you notice them treating you with less trust, you start wondering if you've been making more mistakes than you realized. The danger of gaslighting by proxy is that it doesn't just affect your perception of events, it affects your social environment. It isolates you by making you feel as though others are siding against you or seeing you through a distorted lens. And because the validation of others often feels more objective than your own memory, their agreement with the manipulator's version can feel like proof that you're wrong. This tactic is especially effective because it attacks your support system. Gaslighting works best when the victim feels alone and unable to trust themselves. By roping in others, the manipulator amplifies the emotional impact and speeds up the erosion of your confidence. The proxies become echo chambers for the manipulator's narrative, making it even harder for you to hold on to your version of reality. Gaslighting by proxy can be deliberate, where the manipulator strategically plants seeds in others' minds, or opportunistic, where they simply take advantage of people's biases, assumptions, or loyalty. Either way, the result is the same. Your credibility is undermined in a way that's socially reinforced, leaving you feeling cornered. The best defense against this tactic is twofold. First, document your experiences clearly and privately, so you have a record of events to refer back to when doubt creeps in. Second, be mindful of who you confide in. If someone has already been influenced by the manipulator, they may not be a safe sounding board. If possible, seek outside perspectives from people completely removed from the situation, so you can get feedback that isn't colored by the manipulator's influence. Gaslighting by proxy is powerful because it weaponizes the voices of others against you. But it's important to remember, just because more people repeat a falsehood doesn't make it true. In the end, your perception and lived experience are valid, no matter how many proxies are used to convince you otherwise. False flattery. False flattery is a manipulation tactic where praise is given, not out of genuine admiration or appreciation, but as a strategic tool to influence you. On the surface, it looks like kindness, compliments, positive reinforcement, or admiration. But underneath, it's calculated. The manipulator's goal is to lower your guard, win your favor, or make you more susceptible to agreeing with them or doing what they want. The power of false flattery lies in how our brains are wired to respond to praise. Compliments trigger positive emotions, boost self-esteem, and create a sense of connection with the person giving them. When you feel good around someone, you're more likely to trust them and less likely to scrutinize their intentions. Manipulators exploit this natural tendency by offering praise that is either exaggerated, insincere, or completely unrelated to reality. In relationships, false flattery might look like a partner overpraising you right after an argument, not to genuinely rebuild the bond, but to distract from the conflict and avoid accountability. At work, a boss could compliment your amazing dedication right before asking you to take on unpaid overtime. In social settings, someone might gush about your intelligence or generosity right before slipping in a request for a favor. The flattery becomes bait, and you're more likely to bite when your ego feels stroked. A hallmark of false flattery is inconsistency. The manipulator's praise often appears at strategic moments, when they want something, when they fear losing influence, or when they need to soften you before delivering bad news. Outside of those moments, they may offer little to no positive feedback or even be critical. This creates a push and pull dynamic where you begin to crave their compliments, not realizing they're being deployed as tools, not as reflections of truth. Another common feature is vagueness. False flattery tends to lack the specific details that genuine praise contains. Instead of highlighting a particular effort or quality they've truly noticed, the compliments are broad and generic. You're amazing, you're the best, or no one does it like you. These phrases are easy to throw around and harder to challenge, but they carry less sincerity because they aren't grounded in reality. False flattery can be even more manipulative when combined with other tactics like ingratiation or love bombing. In these cases, the manipulator uses an overload of praise to create emotional dependency. You may start seeking their validation more and more, which makes you easier to control when they decide to withhold it. The danger of false flattery is that over time, it can distort your sense of who genuinely supports you. You might find yourself gravitating toward people who make you feel good in the moment, without noticing that their praise always benefits them more than it benefits you. This can lead to one-sided relationships, where your self-worth is tied to someone else's manipulative approval. The antidote is to listen carefully to the patterns. Does the praise come only when they need something? Is it specific and rooted in truth, or is it vague and inflated? And most importantly, do their actions align with their words? Genuine admiration is consistent and supported by behavior, while false flattery evaporates the moment it's no longer useful to the one giving it. Mimicry for rapport building. Mimicry for rapport building is a psychological tactic where someone subtly mirrors your body language, speech patterns, tone, or behaviors to create a sense of connection and trust. When done naturally, mimicry can be a genuine sign of empathy or alignment, a subconscious way humans build bonds. But when used manipulatively, it's calculated. The manipulator studies you, imitates you, and uses that imitation as a tool to lower your defenses and make you feel like they just get you. Humans are wired to respond positively to familiarity. When someone acts like us, it creates a subconscious sense of safety and belonging. Manipulators exploit this by reflecting back parts of your personality, interests, or mannerisms, giving you the illusion of shared identity. They might pick up on your slang, mimic your gestures, adopt your hobbies, or match your emotional energy. This can make interactions feel unusually comfortable, as though you found someone deeply compatible, when in reality, you found someone skilled at mirroring. In relationships, this can appear as a partner who seems perfect at the start because they share all your tastes, values, and quirks. At work, it could be a colleague who adopts your style of communication and viewpoints to gain your trust, before using that bond for personal gain. In friendships, mimicry can make someone feel like a kindred spirit, until you realize their personality shifts dramatically depending on who they're with. The manipulative use of mimicry works because it accelerates emotional intimacy. You may feel understood on a deeper level and become more willing to share personal details, thinking this person is truly aligned with you. Those personal details can then be stored and later used against you, either to influence your decisions, exploit your vulnerabilities, or strengthen their control. One telltale sign of manipulative mimicry is inconsistency over time. In the early stages, their behavior, preferences, and opinions may match yours perfectly. But as the relationship evolves, especially if you pull away, you might notice their similarities fading or being replaced by mimicry of someone else. This is because the connection was never about authenticity. It was about gaining influence through imitation. Mimicry can also be used in combination with other tactics like love bombing or ingratiation. By mirroring you while flooding you with praise or attention, a manipulator can make the bond feel even stronger, almost like you're looking into a reflection of yourself. This deepens your trust, making it harder to recognize the relationship's one-sided nature. The danger of this tactic is that it can leave you questioning what was real in the relationship once the mask slips. You may wonder if they ever truly liked the same things you did, or if every moment of connection was manufactured. This emotional confusion can prolong your attachment to them because you keep clinging to the version of them that felt so genuine in the beginning. To protect yourself, notice whether the similarities you share with someone feel organic or overly perfect. Do they agree with everything you say? Do their opinions shift when yours do? Are they quick to adopt your mannerisms or interests without having shown them before? True rapport grows naturally over time, with room for differences, while manipulative mimicry tries to compress that process into days or weeks to gain influence faster. When mimicry is authentic, it's a sign of empathy. When it's strategic, it's a mask. And once you recognize it, you can start seeing the real person behind the reflection. Jealousy induction. Jealousy induction is a manipulation tactic where someone deliberately tries to make you feel jealous, insecure, or competitive in order to gain control over your emotions and behavior. Instead of fostering trust, they stir up feelings of inadequacy or fear of loss, knowing that these emotions can push you into chasing their approval, working harder for their attention, or tolerating treatment you would normally reject. The goal isn't always to provoke open conflict. Sometimes it's to quietly destabilize you so you become easier to influence. This tactic can be as blatant as openly flirting with others in your presence, or as subtle as frequently mentioning the attention they receive from other people. They might bring up an ex in glowing terms, emphasize how desirable they are to others, or post suggestive content online knowing you'll see it. In friendships, jealousy induction might involve making plans with others and intentionally excluding you, then casually bringing it up later to trigger a sense of being replaced. At work, it could be a boss comparing you favorably one day and praising a rival the next, keeping you in a constant state of competition. The reason jealousy induction works so well is because it exploits deep human fears, the fear of abandonment, of not being good enough, and of losing something valuable. When these fears are triggered, emotions tend to override logic. You may start seeking reassurance, bending your boundaries, or putting in extra effort just to regain a sense of security. The manipulator benefits from this shift because it places them in a position of power. They decide when you feel valued and when you feel threatened. In relationships, this tactic can also serve as a loyalty test, though it's a deeply unhealthy one. The manipulator might provoke jealousy to see how much you care, but in reality, it's a way of reinforcing their control. If you react strongly, they know they have emotional leverage. If you don't react, they may escalate the behavior until you do. This creates a toxic loop where you feel you must constantly prove your worth to keep the relationship intact. Jealousy induction often pairs with intermittent reinforcement. After making you feel insecure, the manipulator might suddenly offer affection, praise, or reassurance, making the relief feel even more rewarding. This unpredictable pattern keeps you hooked because you never know when the good moments will return, and you don't want to risk losing them. The long-term effect of jealousy induction is erosion of self-confidence. You begin to see yourself through the lens of comparison, always measuring your worth against others, the manipulator highlights. Over time, you may internalize the idea that you are replaceable, which makes it harder to set boundaries or walk away. To protect yourself, it's important to recognize when jealousy is being intentionally provoked. Ask yourself, is this behavior respectful, or is it designed to get a reaction out of me? Healthy relationships, romantic, platonic, or professional, do not require emotional sabotage to maintain interest. True connection thrives on mutual trust and respect, not manufactured insecurity. When someone uses jealousy as a tool, it's not about proving your value. It's about proving their control. The best response is to step back, reclaim your sense of worth, and refuse to compete for validation that should be freely given. Weaponized incompetence. Weaponized incompetence is a manipulation tactic where someone pretends to be incapable of doing a task correctly or deliberately does it poorly, so that you'll stop asking them to do it at all. On the surface, it looks like clumsiness, forgetfulness, or a lack of skill, but underneath it's calculated. The goal is to shift responsibility onto you, freeing them from effort while still benefiting from the work being done. This tactic works because most people prefer to avoid repeated frustration. If you assign someone a task and they do it so badly that you have to redo it yourself, it's tempting to just take it over entirely in the future. The manipulator knows this and uses it to their advantage. They may also hide behind the appearance of trying their best, which makes it harder to directly accuse them of avoiding responsibility without looking harsh or unfair. In relationships, weaponized incompetence might look like a partner who consistently forgets how to do basic chores, like laundry or cooking, so you end up doing them all. In workplaces, it could be a colleague who just can't figure out certain reports or systems, so you take over to keep things running smoothly. In friendships, it might be someone who claims they're terrible at planning, so you're always the one organizing events. A key feature of weaponized incompetence is selectivity. The person often shows competence in other areas or when it benefits them, proving they're capable when motivated. This selective incompetence reveals that the issue isn't ability, it's willingness. It's a choice to be bad at something in order to avoid doing it. Over time, this tactic creates a lopsided dynamic. You carry the bulk of the responsibilities, while the manipulator gets to maintain the appearance of helplessness. They may even thank you for being so good at it, turning the burden they've dumped on you into a fake compliment. This can make you feel guilty for resenting the imbalance, because on the surface they seem appreciative. Weaponized incompetence can also be used in high-stakes situations to avoid accountability. For example, if someone is called out for harmful behavior, they might claim ignorance. "I didn't know that was wrong," even after being told multiple times. By framing themselves as too uninformed or incapable to do better, they avoid taking responsibility for change. The danger of this tactic is that it can lead to burnout and resentment for the person on the receiving end. You end up overworking, overcompensating, and sacrificing your own time because it feels easier than battling with someone who refuses to step up. And because the manipulator hides behind incompetence rather than open refusal, it's harder to confront without them playing the victim. The best way to counter weaponized incompetence is to resist the urge to take over. Instead, hold the person accountable, offer clear instructions, and refuse to redo the work for them. If they continue to underperform, acknowledge that the issue is effort, not skill. Once you stop rewarding the behavior by picking up the slack, they lose the incentive to keep playing incapable. True incompetence is a lack of skill that can be improved with effort. Weaponized incompetence is a lack of effort disguised as inability, and it's one of the most exhausting manipulations to live with if you don't recognize it for what it is. Framing with false urgency. Framing with false urgency is a manipulation tactic where someone creates an exaggerated or entirely fabricated sense of time pressure to push you into making quick decisions without proper thought or evaluation. By framing the situation as urgent, they bypass your ability to fully assess the details, weigh your options, or spot hidden risks. The manipulator's goal is to keep you reactive instead of reflective, because a rushed mind is easier to influence and more likely to comply. This tactic often shows up in sales, negotiations, or high-pressure environments. A salesperson might insist, "This offer is only good for today," even though it will be available for weeks. A colleague might claim, "We need your decision in the next hour," when there's no real deadline. In relationships, a manipulative partner might say, "If you don't decide right now, I'll take it as a no," to corner you into agreeing without discussion. In all cases, the urgency is not about necessity, it's about control. The false urgency works by triggering a scarcity mindset. When we believe time or opportunity is running out, our brain shifts into survival mode, focusing on securing the immediate gain rather than evaluating the long-term consequences. This makes us more likely to accept unfavorable terms, overlook warning signs, or skip due diligence just to avoid missing out. A skilled manipulator will often pair false urgency with emotional triggers. They might guilt you for holding things up, play on your fear of disappointing others, or act visibly frustrated to make you feel responsible for the delay. They might even combine it with manufactured crises, inventing a problem that must be solved right now, so you don't have time to question whether the problem is real in the first place. In workplaces, this tactic can be used to rush approvals on flawed plans, secure commitments for extra work without proper compensation, or get you to sign agreements without reading the fine print. In personal life, it might be used to push you into major commitments, moving in, lending money, or making big purchases before you're ready. The danger of false urgency is that it can become a habit you adapt to. If someone constantly frames things as urgent, you may stop questioning whether the deadlines are real and simply operate in a state of constant rush. This chronic pressure erodes your ability to think critically and can lead to decisions that benefit the manipulator while leaving you with regret. The best defense against this tactic is to pause, no matter how much urgency is being pushed. Ask questions like, "What will actually happen if I take more time?" Or "Can you show me the deadline in writing?" If the urgency is legitimate, there should be verifiable evidence. If not, you'll quickly see that the rush is artificial. True urgency exists when immediate action is necessary for a genuine reason. False urgency exists to rob you of your clarity. The more you recognize the difference, the harder it becomes for anyone to control you with a ticking clock that was never real in the first place. Deceptive framing. Deceptive framing is a manipulation tactic where someone presents information, events, or choices in a carefully constructed way that hides, distorts, or shifts the true meaning. Instead of lying outright, they choose what to emphasize, what to omit, and how to position the details so that you draw the conclusion they want you to, without them having to state it directly. This tactic relies less on false facts and more on false perspective. The manipulator controls the lens you're looking through. For example, a politician might highlight only the positive results of a policy while burying the negative impacts in vague language. A partner might tell you about a conflict with a friend in a way that makes them look blameless while painting the other person as unreasonable, conveniently leaving out the parts where they escalated the situation. A company might advertise a product as 50% off without revealing that they doubled the price the week before. The facts may not be fabricated, but they are strategically arranged to serve their agenda. Deceptive framing is effective because humans rarely evaluate raw facts in isolation. Our interpretations are heavily influenced by context, sequencing, and the emotional tone in which information is delivered. A manipulator uses this to guide your thinking down a predetermined path, making it feel like you arrived at the conclusion yourself. This self-convincing is especially powerful because people are more likely to defend decisions they believe they made independently. This tactic can also involve selective comparisons. Someone might make a bad option look good simply by framing it next to an even worse one, a classic lesser of two evils trick. Or they might redefine the standards by which something is judged so that their preferred choice comes out on top. For example, they might evaluate a failed project as a success by only measuring the one metric that improved, while ignoring all the others that declined. In personal relationships, deceptive framing can erode trust over time. If one person constantly frames situations so that they appear as the victim, hero, or reasonable party, the other person may feel guilty, defensive, or indebted without realizing they've been led there by design. In workplaces, deceptive framing can be used to secure funding, avoid accountability, or shift blame onto others while keeping one's own record clean. One reason this tactic is hard to detect is because it doesn't always involve falsehoods. It's about how truths are arranged. The danger is that by controlling the frame, the manipulator controls the conversation, making it difficult to even notice the missing pieces. By the time you think to ask for more information, you've already accepted the frame they've given you. The best way to counter deceptive framing is to step outside the frame entirely. Ask yourself, what information am I not being shown? How would this look from another perspective? And if I stripped away the emotional tone, what facts would remain? By reframing the situation in your own words and seeking independent verification, you take back control over how you interpret the details. Deceptive framing is not about giving you the truth. It's about giving you a curated truth. And unless you question the frame itself, you may never realize how much of the picture has been cropped out. Entrainment via reciprocal obligation. Entrainment via reciprocal obligation is a subtle yet powerful manipulation tactic that combines two psychological forces: the human tendency to sync our behavior and emotions with those around us, entrainment, and the deep social instinct to repay perceived debts, reciprocal obligation. When used together, they create a sense of rhythm and indebtedness that makes it much harder to say no, even when you should. Entrainment happens naturally in social interactions. People unconsciously match each other's tone, posture, speech patterns, and even breathing rates. When someone intentionally controls this dynamic, they can influence your emotional state without you realizing it. They may mirror your body language to build rapport, subtly guide the conversation's pace, or shift the emotional tone to match their agenda. Once you're in sync with them, your guard lowers and your willingness to cooperate increases. Reciprocal obligation is the social rule that if someone gives us something, whether it's a gift, a compliment, help, or even just attention, we feel compelled to give something back. Manipulators exploit this by offering favors, kindness, or resources in calculated ways, knowing that the urge to reciprocate will weigh on you. When combined, these tactics work like a charm. The manipulator first uses entrainment to get you emotionally aligned with them. You feel connected, understood, and comfortable. Then they give you something of perceived value, help with a task, a small gift, a piece of insider information, or even just emotional support when you need it most. By the time they make their real request, you're already in sync with them emotionally and you feel like you owe them. A double bind that makes refusal feel unnatural or even rude. This can happen in personal relationships, where someone slowly sinks to your moods and rhythms, builds deep rapport, and then starts doing thoughtful things for you. Later, they leverage that goodwill to get you to agree to things you wouldn't have otherwise, lending money, covering for them, or making sacrifices to your own schedule. In business, it might be a salesperson who matches your communication style, builds a warm connection, offers a free gift or special insider deal, and then pushes for a big purchase before you've had time to reflect. The danger of entrainment via reciprocal obligation is that it feels good at first. Being in sync with someone and receiving acts of generosity naturally builds positive feelings. But because the generosity is strategic, it comes with an unspoken price tag, and once you've paid it, the cycle can repeat endlessly. Over time, you may find yourself doing more and more for the manipulator, not out of genuine desire, but out of a constant sense of owing them. To protect yourself, it's important to be aware of the emotional shift that happens when you click with someone. Ask yourself, is this rapport developing naturally or does it feel engineered? When they do something nice, is it truly no strings attached, or does it quickly lead to a request? Remember that you are never obligated to return a favor if doing so would compromise your boundaries, values, or well-being. Entrainment and reciprocity are natural parts of human connection when they're genuine. But in the hands of a manipulator, they become tools to keep you locked in a cycle of emotional sinking and constant repayment, a rhythm that serves them far more than it serves you. Triadic closure manipulation. Triadic closure manipulation is a tactic that exploits a natural social phenomenon. When two people have a mutual friend or contact, they are more likely to form a relationship with each other. In healthy social networks, triadic closure helps build community and trust. But in manipulation, it's used strategically, not to foster genuine connection, but to gain influence, gather information, or control the flow of relationships around you. At its core, the manipulator identifies or creates a triangle between themselves, you, and a third person. They then influence how you and that third person perceive each other, often by controlling the narratives, filtering information, or staging interactions in ways that benefit them. They might introduce you to someone while framing that person positively or negatively, shaping your opinion before you even meet. Or they might insert themselves into an existing bond, gradually positioning themselves as the bridge or gatekeeper between the two of you. In personal relationships, this could look like a friend introducing you to another friend, but quietly planting doubts about them, so you never fully trust them without the manipulator's guidance. In workplaces, it might be a colleague who connects you to a higher-up, but subtly reminds you that they are the reason you have access, making you feel indebted. In more toxic scenarios, the manipulator might intentionally create misunderstandings or conflicts between two people, so they can remain the trusted middle figure both sides depend on. One of the most common manipulative uses of triadic closure is in social triangulation, where the manipulator leverages the third person as a silent validator of their perspective. For example, they might say, "I was talking to Alex, and they agree you've been distant lately," making you feel like your behavior is being noticed and judged by more than just one person. This strengthens the manipulator's influence because it creates the illusion of consensus and social pressure. The danger of triadic closure manipulation is that it can reshape your social reality without you realizing it. By subtly controlling how connections form and how people are perceived, the manipulator can isolate you from certain relationships, strengthen your ties to others, and ultimately weave a network where they are the central hub. This central position gives them control over information flow, social dynamics, and even group decision-making. Over time, this can erode trust, not just in the manipulator, but in your other relationships. You may start to second-guess what you hear from mutual contacts, wonder about hidden motives, or feel dependent on the manipulator to interpret events for you. This dependence is exactly what they want, because it keeps you tethered to their influence. To protect yourself from this tactic, pay attention to how relationships are introduced and framed. If someone consistently mediates your interactions with others, question why you can't connect directly. Be wary of anyone who positions themselves as the only reliable source of information about other people. The more you can build independent relationships, the harder it becomes for someone to manipulate the network around you. Triadic closure is a natural social force, but when turned into a tool of manipulation, it's less about building bridges and more about building a web, with the manipulator at its center. And the more you can step out of that web, the more clearly you'll see how those connections were being controlled in the first place. Halo effect exploitation. Halo effect exploitation is a subtle but potent psychological manipulation tactic that preys on your natural tendency to trust and admire someone based on one strikingly positive trait. It's the way manipulators use a single bright facet of themselves, beauty, charisma, intelligence, status, or success, to blind you to the shadows lurking in other aspects of their personality. They don't need to change who they are. They simply polish one part of themselves until it gleams so brilliantly that you stop questioning what lies in the darkness. This isn't seduction, it's strategic misdirection, and it works because your brain craves coherence and consistency. The halo effect itself is a cognitive bias, where one positive attribute unconsciously leads you to assume that everything else about a person must also be good. If someone is physically attractive, you assume they're kind. If they're witty and charming, you presume they're honest. If they're accomplished or intelligent, you instinctively believe they're emotionally stable or trustworthy. This mental shortcut is harmless in ordinary situations, but in the hands of a manipulator, it becomes a weapon. Manipulators understand this bias intimately. They cultivate the qualities that will dazzle you most and hide the traits that could reveal their darker intentions. They may dress impeccably, speak with unshakable confidence, or make those around them laugh effortlessly. They might appear generous and loving in public, or intellectual and insightful in private conversations. These traits make you feel seen, safe, and even lucky. Your mind, eager to maintain the illusion of coherence, begins filling in the blanks. You stop scrutinizing. When they show coldness, cruelty, or control, your first reaction is to rationalize it. They're just stressed. They didn't mean it. That's not who they really are. The truth is there all along, but your perception has been clouded by the brilliance of their halo. What makes halo effect exploitation especially dangerous is its invisibility. It doesn't scream abuse. It whispers charm. It could be the CEO who inspires awe with vision but abuses power in private. It could be the romantic partner who showers you with adoration in public while withholding emotionally behind closed doors. It could even be the friend who seems perfect on the surface but subtly competes with or undermines you when you're not paying attention. Their shine is not truth, it's armor, a meticulously crafted illusion designed to shield their faults. And the moment you begin questioning it, the moment you notice inconsistencies or try to assert boundaries, you are met with disbelief, not just from them, but from others around you. The manipulator has so skillfully leveraged the halo effect that everyone else sees only brilliance, not the harm hidden beneath. You're not merely confronting their manipulation, you're confronting an entire illusion built to deceive not just you, but the world itself. Breaking free from halo effect exploitation requires awareness, discipline, and courage. You must learn to see past the gleaming surface and examine patterns of behavior over time, rather than being seduced by charm or appearance. Trust is earned through consistent actions, not through brilliance or charisma alone. Until then, the halo blinds, and the manipulator thrives. Desensitization by gradual exposure. Desensitization by gradual exposure is a psychological manipulation tactic that quietly erodes your sense of what's acceptable. It doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds slowly, in barely noticeable increments. The manipulator conditions you to tolerate behavior that would once have shocked or angered you, gradually shifting the boundaries of what you consider normal. This is the slow erosion of your defenses through repeated, subtle violations, small enough to be ignored at first, but frequent enough to quietly reshape your perception over time. It never begins with outright abuse. It starts with discomfort, tiny disturbances that feel manageable. Maybe it's a slightly mean joke, a dismissive remark, or a broken promise. You notice you feel uneasy, but the behavior is often downplayed, brushed off with an apology, or presented as trivial. You let it pass. Then it happens again, a little more intense, slightly more unsettling, and again, and again. Each instance alone might feel inconsequential, but combined, they quietly chip away at your boundaries, recalibrating what your mind labels as acceptable. Over time, this repetition reshapes your nervous system. The alarm bells that once rang with clear warnings start to quiet. You become accustomed to tension, to emotional unpredictability, to subtle disrespect. You begin rationalizing it. It's not that bad, you tell yourself. You adjust, lower your expectations, and convince yourself that patience, empathy, or understanding is the mature way to respond. But this is not maturity. This is conditioning. The manipulator orchestrates it with precision. If they had approached you with overt cruelty from the start, you would instinctively resist or flee. Instead, they introduce harm incrementally, training you to tolerate it, recalibrating your baseline for what is normal in a relationship, a workplace, or even in life. By the time their behavior becomes openly toxic, your emotional defenses have already been dulled. Your instincts are muted, your fight response replaced by silence, your tolerance unnaturally high. This tactic is prevalent in abusive relationships, cults, authoritarian systems, and toxic workplaces alike. Its brilliance lies in its subtlety. It doesn't feel like brainwashing. It feels like adaptation. You believe you are handling challenges well, that your empathy and patience are making a difference, that you are resilient. In truth, you are being rewired to accept the unacceptable, inch by inch, step by step. The most insidious part is awareness. Often you don't recognize how far you've been conditioned until someone external points it out. Wait, how are you okay with this? That moment is jarring. It doesn't feel like clarity, it feels like waking up inside a house that has been quietly set on fire around you. By the time the flames are visible, you've already been desensitized, making it harder to respond, harder to reclaim your boundaries, and harder to remember what your instincts once knew to be intolerable. Breaking free from this conditioning demands vigilance, self-reflection, and courage. It requires you to recalibrate your own sense of normal, to identify the subtle invasions of your boundaries, and to reawaken the instincts that were dulled over time. Only by recognizing the slow burn of manipulation can you reclaim your emotional autonomy and refuse to be conditioned any longer. Mirroring vulnerabilities. Mirroring vulnerabilities is a highly manipulative psychological tactic that masquerades as intimacy, but is actually a calculated form of control. It's not about genuine connection. It's an emotional illusion, meticulously crafted to make you feel seen, understood, and profoundly bonded, all while lowering your defenses. In reality, it is stolen empathy, borrowed pain, and strategic mimicry. It begins the moment you open yourself up. You share something raw, perhaps a childhood trauma, a personal betrayal, or an insecurity you've carried in silence. Most people might respond with compassion or quiet support, but a manipulator sees opportunity. Almost instantly, they mirror your experience. That's wild. I went through the exact same thing, they say. They match your tone, echo your language, and synchronize their emotional energy with yours. In that instant, you feel a rush of connection, a sense that you've found someone who truly gets you. But it isn't understanding, it's reflection. They aren't revealing themselves, they are studying you. Every vulnerability you expose becomes material, a script they can perform, a tool they can wield. Every mirrored story deepens your trust because it feels authentic. It feels like fate. You aren't just talking to someone, you're looking into a mirror that speaks back to you, And in doing so, they fast-track emotional intimacy, accelerating the bond far beyond what is normal or safe. The danger lies in how quickly this false intimacy forms. You find yourself trusting them more than people you've known for years, overlooking warning signs and excusing small manipulations because someone finally seems to understand you. That sense of sameness, that feeling of shared experience, becomes glue. You attach to the reflection, believing in the connection, never suspecting it is entirely fabricated. Then comes the subtle power shift. The very vulnerabilities you shared, the moments you believed were safe, become weapons. They know your fears, your insecurities, your emotional triggers. With precision, they use this knowledge to manipulate, guilt, silence, or destabilize you. You feel exposed, confused, and betrayed. How could someone who seemed to understand you so deeply suddenly turn indifferent, cruel, or cold? The answer is, they never truly understood you. They replicated you. They built a false self from your story to infiltrate your trust. Once inside, they do not offer healing or solidarity. They exploit, amplify, and twist the wounds you exposed, turning your own vulnerability into leverage. What felt like connection was actually emotional burglary. By the time clarity dawns, you've already been unguarded, already attached, and already emotionally owned. You thought you found a kindred spirit, but instead, you encountered a manipulator wearing a mask crafted from your pain, reflecting your soul only to control it. Mirroring vulnerabilities leaves a lasting impact because it rewires the way you perceive trust and intimacy. It teaches you to associate empathy with danger, closeness with risk, and vulnerability with betrayal. Recovering from it requires re-establishing your boundaries, relearning your instincts, and remembering that true connection is never built on theft. It is mutual, safe, and authentic. Shame. Anchoring. Shame anchoring is a profoundly manipulative psychological tactic where someone deliberately links feelings of shame to specific behaviors, desires, or expressions of your authentic self. It doesn't merely aim to make you feel bad in the moment. Its goal is far more insidious. The manipulator plants a hidden hook inside your psyche, a weight that tugs at you every time you attempt to act freely, express yourself, or embrace what makes you uniquely you. Long after their words are spoken, the shame lingers, pulling you downward, reshaping the way you perceive yourself and your actions. This tactic is precision-driven, exploiting the vulnerabilities you hold most dear. Perhaps you revealed a passion, a personal struggle, or a fragile part of yourself. Instead of offering empathy, understanding, or encouragement, the manipulator smirks, rolls their eyes, or delivers a cutting remark. No one wants to hear about your problems all the time, or why would you even think that's impressive? In that moment, shame is anchored directly to your expression, searing itself into memory. You may laugh it off, change the subject, or tell yourself they didn't mean it. But the internalization has already begun. The true power of shame anchoring lies in its longevity. You don't need repeated attacks to be conditioned. A single well-timed jab in a vulnerable moment is enough to create an automatic emotional reflex. The next time you attempt to express that same part of yourself, an internal voice whispers, "Remember how foolish that looked. Don't do it again." You freeze, self-censor, and dim your own presence. The manipulator doesn't need to shame you repeatedly. You have now been trained to do it yourself. You silence your voice, hide your joy, choke down your opinions, and shrink your existence quietly and willingly. What makes this tactic especially cruel is its subtlety and camouflage. It often wears the mask of humor, honesty, or realness. They'll say, "I'm just being real," or "Can't you take a joke?" When you attempt to confront them, you appear oversensitive, and the shame doubles back on you. Over time, you stop sharing, stop shining, stop daring to express even the smallest part of yourself. It's not a dramatic breakdown. They rarely break you loudly. Instead, they anchor shame to the areas of yourself that once felt alive, vibrant, or untouchable. Eventually, even freedom feels precarious. Expressing joy, ambition, or authenticity triggers an echo of their anchored shame. It doesn't feel safe anymore, not because it inherently isn't, but because someone meticulously taught you to fear it. This psychological conditioning reshapes your relationship with yourself, teaching you that your thoughts, feelings, and passions are liabilities rather than strengths. The essence of shame anchoring is the quiet theft of self-expression, turning your own mind into the enforcer of limitation, a constant reminder that vulnerability comes at a cost. Breaking free from shame anchoring requires gentle self-awareness, the courage to challenge internalized judgments, and the rebuilding of trust in your own voice. It's about untangling the hooks, reclaiming the spaces that were deemed off-limits, and learning to recognize that the shame you feel isn't yours. It was deliberately planted. Only then can the parts of you that were silenced begin to breathe again. Selective memory manipulation. Selective memory manipulation is a deeply insidious psychological tactic in which a manipulator intentionally remembers only certain fragments of events, carefully curated fragments that serve their narrative, while conveniently forgetting everything that contradicts their story. This is not mere forgetfulness or absent-mindedness. It is a deliberate rewriting of reality designed to control perception, evade accountability, and make you question your own recollection. Over time, it doesn't just distort events, it distorts your sense of self. The manipulator cherry-picks the moments that benefit them. They remember every favor, every compromise, every kindness they extended to you, yet forget or dismiss every effort, sacrifice, or gesture you made in return. They recall your emotional outbursts, but erase the weeks of provocation that led to them. They hold a magnifying glass to a single mistake you made, while conveniently ignoring the countless times they hurt you. Partial truths are presented as the full story, and whenever you attempt to fill in the missing pieces, you are met with denial, deflection, or a smug, "That's not how I remember it." This tactic is a subtle form of gaslighting. It doesn't outright deny your reality, it edits it just enough to plant seeds of doubt. You replay conversations and events in your head, questioning yourself. Am I overreacting, misremembering, being unfair? The truth is, you are not. Your reality is being carefully rewritten by someone whose priority is controlling the narrative rather than seeking honesty. Over time, selective memory manipulation becomes a weapon of silence and omission. The manipulator recalls only the moments that portray them as the victim and erases any instance where they are accountable. They may insist, "I never raised my voice," even though they did, just not when witnesses were around. They claim, "You always twist things," as they twist the timeline, the tone, and the truth itself. Each conversation leaves you doubting your memory, hesitating before speaking up, unsure if your recollections are valid. That hesitation is their victory. If you cannot trust your own memory, you become reliant on theirs. You start handing over your reality, piece by piece, until it is no longer yours. The cumulative effect of this tactic is profound. It doesn't just generate confusion, it causes an identity crisis. When someone else dictates what actually happened, they control not only the events themselves, but who you were in those moments. Your perception of yourself, your instincts, and even your emotional reactions are gradually overwritten by their version of reality. Bit by bit, your truth is replaced with fiction, until the line between what truly happened and what you've been told happened is so blurred that even you can no longer distinguish it. Selective memory manipulation is more than deception. It is a quiet, relentless conquest of your inner world. The manipulator doesn't just change your story, they attempt to change you, shaping your identity according to the narrative they want to enforce, leaving you trapped in a hall of mirrors where reality bends to someone else's will. Unpredictable reward system. The unpredictable reward system is a manipulation tactic that functions like emotional gambling, trapping you in a cycle of confusion, craving, and desperation. The manipulator doles out praise, affection, or approval inconsistently. One moment you feel adored, the next ignored. Then suddenly they're warm again, just long enough to keep you hoping, chasing, and staying. This isn't love, it's control. Say it works by turning your nervous system into a slot machine. Early on, the manipulator floods you with attention, constant messages, compliments, intense displays of affection that feel euphoric and addictive. You're hooked. Then, without warning, they withdraw. Responses stop, warmth disappears, they become distant, cold, distracted. Panic rises. What did I do? Did I upset them? Did I change? The silence wounds, leaving you anxious and vulnerable. Just as you begin to pull back or question the relationship, they return, affectionate, reassuring, sometimes apologetic. Relief floods your system, triggering a hit of dopamine far more intense than steady love because it comes after pain. You're not addicted to them, you're addicted to the uncertainty, to the chase, to the cycle itself. You begin overanalyzing, working harder to earn approval, silencing your own needs to avoid pushing them away. Every look, word, and moment becomes a puzzle you desperately try to solve. They give enough reward to keep hope alive, but never enough to make you feel secure. If they were cruel constantly, you'd leave. If they were kind constantly, you'd relax. By alternating cruelty and kindness, they destabilize your emotions and keep your focus entirely on them. You blame yourself for their distance, reward them for their cruelty simply because they stop, and slowly forget what real love feels like. Peace no longer feels safe. It feels like winning a game you were never meant to play. Phantom norms. Phantom norms are invisible, unspoken rules that a manipulator invents and enforces, as if they were universal and morally unquestionable, but they are not. They are artificial expectations, disguised as common sense. You never agreed to them. You were never told them outright. Yet the moment you break one, you're punished as though you've committed a serious betrayal. This tactic doesn't just control your actions, it rewires your perception of reality. Manipulators use phantom norms to shape your behavior without your consent. They imply that certain standards are obvious. Everyone knows you don't do that. Or, I shouldn't have to explain this. It's basic respect. But when you pause and think, none of these rules were ever mutual, explicit, or fair. They are vague, shifting, and always favor the manipulator. Maybe you didn't respond to a message quickly enough, or forgot to invite them to something you didn't even realize mattered. Suddenly you're guilt-tripped, cold-shouldered, or accused of being selfish. If you try to explain yourself, it only makes things worse, because this isn't about right or wrong. It's about enforcing a rule you didn't know existed until it was broken. The effect is a constant sense of walking on eggshells. You begin overthinking every move, not because you've done something wrong, but because you're terrified of breaking another invisible rule. Spontaneity, authenticity, and confidence fade as hypervigilance takes over. You scan for clues about what's acceptable, trying to stay on the manipulator's good side without ever knowing the criteria. Phantom norms also breed guilt and shame. You internalize the idea that you're failing socially, emotionally, or morally simply because someone repeatedly reacts as if you should have known better. The truth is, you're not failing. You're being manipulated. These rules are not universal. They are custom-built to keep you off balance, obedient, and apologizing for things you never agreed were wrong. What makes phantom norms so devastating is their invisibility. There is no boundary to push against, only the constant, unspoken threat that you will be judged, shamed, or discarded if you don't comply with rules that only one person knows, and that person can change them at any moment to suit their agenda. Echoic agreement trap. The echoic agreement trap is a manipulative tactic that disguises control as understanding. It works by mirroring your thoughts, values, dreams, or frustrations so convincingly that you believe you finally found someone who truly gets you. What feels like deep emotional resonance is, in reality, a carefully crafted performance designed to lower your defenses, earn your trust, and pave the way for later exploitation. At first, it's intoxicating. You share something vulnerable, your fears about love, childhood wounds, or dreams of freedom, and they echo it back with uncanny precision. "I've felt that too," they say. "It's like you're reading my mind. No one has ever understood me this way." You feel seen, understood, safe. You drop your guard and open up more. Every time you share, they reflect your words and emotions like a mirror, saying exactly what you need to hear. It isn't a conversation, it's an emotional seduction. Here's the trap. The agreement isn't real. The manipulator isn't revealing their own truth. They're collecting yours. They memorize your values, language, and emotional patterns to gain influence over you later. When someone mirrors your mind, your brain interprets that as trustworthiness, as truth. Once they've secured that trust, the subtle shift begins. The agreement begins to waver gently. You're questioned, corrected, and subtly redirected. Because you've bonded with them so deeply, you assume you must be misunderstanding. Slowly, you start adjusting, conforming, and adopting their values, believing they were your own all along. This tactic is common in toxic relationships, manipulative friendships, cults, and abusive dynamics. It rarely starts with domination. It starts with echoes. Once you hear your own thoughts and feelings reflected back to you, you stop protecting them. You hand them over willingly, piece by piece. The echoic agreement trap doesn't steal your identity outright. Instead, it slowly co-opts it, until one day you look in the mirror and see someone else's reflection smiling back. False scarcity illusion. The false scarcity illusion is a manipulative tactic that creates the perception that something, love, opportunity, attention, or time, is extremely limited, even when it isn't. Its purpose is to pressure you into action, compliance, or emotional dependence. By triggering urgency, fear of loss, and the desperate need to secure what seems fleeting, it hijacks your survival instincts. But the scarcity isn't real. It's manufactured to make you feel replaceable, rushed, and inadequate. The manipulator might drop hints that they're always in high demand, other people would kill to be with me, or you're lucky I chose you. They suggest that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and subtly imply you could lose them at any moment. Maybe others are lining up to take your place, romantically, professionally, or emotionally. You start believing you have to earn what they're offering. Mistakes feel dangerous. Validation becomes a necessity. You chase approval in fear that if you hesitate or falter, someone else will take what you thought was yours. This tactic works because it targets deep-seated insecurities. It makes you feel that what you want is just out of reach, that you must compete, and that affection, attention, or opportunity is a privilege to be earned rather than a right. You forget your worth. You walk on eggshells, accept treatment you would otherwise reject, and overinvest emotionally, financially, or physically, all out of fear of loss. False scarcity is common in narcissistic romantic manipulation, toxic work environments, cult recruitment, and abusive friendships. It doesn't matter if the thing offered is actually valuable. What matters is that you believe it's rare. The darker truth is that the scarcity is often entirely performative. The manipulator may offer the same opportunity to multiple people. They never intended to walk away. They just wanted to see how far you would go to keep it. By the time you realize there was never any real shortage, you've already overextended yourself, exhausted your resources, and compromised your boundaries. It wasn't love, validation, or a genuine opportunity. It was leverage wrapped in fear, powered entirely by illusion. Tactical praise withdrawal. Tactical praise withdrawal is a psychological manipulation tactic where affection, approval, and validation are given generously at first, only to be suddenly and strategically taken away. It creates a silent emotional vacuum, leaving you scrambling to earn back what you once received freely. Praise becomes a drug, and its absence triggers withdrawal. At the start, the praise is intoxicating. You're told how brilliant, beautiful, strong, or rare you are. Every gesture is met with admiration. You feel chosen, elevated, seen in a way that feels almost spiritual. This isn't accidental. It's the setup. The manipulator builds you up not to celebrate you, but to create a high they can later control. Then, just as suddenly, the praise stops. Not in anger, but in silence. Actions that once earned you affection now earn nothing. No smile, no compliment, no affirmation. You feel a shift. Your nervous system panics. Did I do something wrong? Did I change? What do they see now that they didn't before? This is the trap. The withdrawal is deliberate, designed to create insecurity, make you question yourself, and trigger desperate attempts to regain the manipulator's approval. You try harder, apologize for things you didn't do, and start molding yourself into the version they seem to prefer. Not because you want to, but because you need to feel loved again. The danger intensifies because the praise returns in small, unpredictable doses, just enough to hook you again, reward your compliance, and then vanish once more. This cycle cultivates emotional dependence that feels like addiction. The longer the withdrawal lasts, the more euphoric the praise feels when it finally returns. By the time you recognize what's happening, you've already surrendered parts of yourself to reclaim it. Tactical praise withdrawal isn't about love, it's about power. It's not just what they give, but what they take away and how desperately they make you miss it. Distorted reciprocity. Distorted reciprocity is a psychological manipulation tactic that twists the natural give and take of human relationships into a weapon. It takes the instinct to return kindness, a fundamental part of empathy, and warps it into a tool of control, guilt, and obligation. This isn't about mutual respect or balanced exchange. It's about keeping a hidden scoreboard and using it to make you feel like you owe far more than you ever agreed to give. At first, the manipulator seems incredibly generous. They go out of their way to help, support you emotionally, or even offer financial assistance. You're caught off guard. It feels sincere. You start to trust. You might even feel lucky. But then the tone shifts. They begin reminding you, explicitly or subtly, of everything they've done. After all I've done for you, this is how you treat me. Or, I guess I just care more than you do. What once felt like a gift now feels like a debt. The trap of distorted reciprocity lies in its unspoken nature. You were never told there were strings attached. You never asked for the help to be transactional. But once you accept it, the manipulator changes the rules. Suddenly they expect unquestioning loyalty, endless emotional labor, immediate favors, silence, submission. Resist, and you are labeled ungrateful, selfish, or toxic. This tactic is particularly damaging because it turns your kindness into a vulnerability. You feel guilty for having needs, wrong for saying no. You begin overcompensating, doing more than you want, giving more than you can, just to make things even. But the scales are rigged. No matter how much you give, it's never enough. The manipulator inflates what they've done and minimizes what you contribute. Distorted reciprocity doesn't just control behavior, it corrodes self-worth. It convinces you that the only way to maintain love, safety, or peace is by constantly paying off an invisible emotional debt. You lose the ability to say no without guilt. You stop asking for what you need. You become a servant to a balance sheet that exists only in their mind. You were never in a relationship. You were in a transaction you didn't agree to, one where the price keeps rising and the receipt is always held over your head like a loaded gun. Neurolinguistic pattern disruption. Neurolinguistic pattern disruption is a psychological manipulation tactic that interrupts your natural thought and behavior patterns through confusion, contradiction, or emotional shock. It creates a temporary mental vulnerability that the manipulator exploits to implant suggestions, control decisions, or push boundaries you wouldn't normally cross. This isn't about force. It's about hacking the mind by derailing it. Our brains thrive on predictability. When conversations follow expected rhythms, your subconscious guides your responses. But when something suddenly doesn't make sense, a strange question, a bizarre compliment, or an emotional pivot that doesn't fit the situation, your mental gears grind to a halt. Your conscious mind kicks in, trying to make sense of what just happened, and in that brief pause, you're exposed. That's when the manipulator strikes. They might interject at a tense moment with something odd, a random joke, an offbeat compliment, or a deep philosophical question. Why do you always look so calm when you're upset? It's kind of beautiful. Your anger halts. Your thought process derails. In that pause, the emotional tone shifts, controlled entirely by them. In more extreme cases, they use pattern disruption in high-emotion settings, dropping a shocking confession, a sudden apology, or an unexpected outburst in the middle of a calm conversation. The chaos jolts your nervous system into hyper-alertness, a reactive state where logic takes a back seat and feelings dominate. They guide you through that chaos with precise words, nudging your thoughts exactly where they want them. This tactic is common in cult recruitment, high-pressure sales, psychological, abuse, and manipulative dating strategies. It isn't about making sense. It's about scrambling sense long enough to disarm you. What makes it so insidious is how invisible it is. You walk away feeling off balance, unsure why you changed your mind, why you agreed, or why you suddenly feel empathy for someone who just hurt you. The truth is, You didn't make a conscious choice. They disrupted your patterns, and while you were trying to regain your footing, they planted the path they wanted you to follow. Strategic self-disclosure. Strategic self-disclosure is a manipulation tactic in which someone shares personal information not to foster genuine connection, but to lower your defenses, create false intimacy, and extract trust, secrets, or loyalty from you. It feels like vulnerability, but it's a performance, a carefully timed revelation designed to disarm rather than connect. At first, it's disarming. You're speaking with someone who suddenly opens up, revealing a painful memory, a dark struggle, or a private story, maybe about a toxic ex, a fractured family, or a traumatic past. It catches you off guard. You feel honored, chosen. You think, they trust me, and before you know it, you start opening up too. That's the trap. The manipulator isn't being vulnerable. They're being strategic. They reveal just enough pain to appear human, just enough detail to seem real, but not enough to truly expose themselves. Their story is rehearsed, selectively edited, and designed to trigger your empathy while prompting emotional reciprocity. The moment you start sharing in return, they've won. This tactic is especially effective in early-stage relationships, job interviews, political persuasion, and cult recruitment. You bond quickly, bypassing normal boundaries. You trust them more than you should, and why wouldn't you? They went first, bearing their soul. What you don't see is how often the same story has been shared with others, pulling countless people into the same web. What makes strategic self-disclosure so dangerous is how much it feels like love, honesty, or deep connection. It taps into your compassion and bypasses your logical guardrails. You start seeing this person as safe, as someone who understands you, but they aren't interested in you. They're interested in your openness, your secrets, and your emotional availability. The more you reveal, the easier you are to influence, manipulate, and control. Eventually, the cracks appear. Their stories don't add up. The empathy fades. The same person who once opened their heart now uses what you told them against you, not out of passion, but out of calculation. Their vulnerability was never about truth. It was a mask used to unlock yours. Ambiguity control. Ambiguity control is a psychological manipulation tactic that thrives on intentional vagueness. It occurs when someone withholds clarity, avoids commitment, or delivers mixed signals, not because they're confused, but because they want you to be. This strategy keeps you guessing, overthinking, and emotionally chasing answers that never come. By controlling the level of uncertainty in a relationship or interaction, the manipulator controls you. At first, it may appear as subtle miscommunication. You ask where you stand, and they say things like, "Let's just see where it goes," or "I don't like labels." You point out that their actions hurt you, and they respond, "You're reading too much into it." Their words don't contradict you outright. They simply never anchor to anything solid. That ambiguity becomes the leash. When someone refuses to define the dynamic, you're left doing all the emotional labor. You read between the lines, analyze texts, replay conversations, and search for hidden meanings. You adapt, shapeshift, and compromise, all to earn the clarity they deliberately deny you. That's the game. The more unclear they are, the more invested you become in trying to understand them. Ambiguity control grants the manipulator enormous power without ever appearing cruel. They're not yelling, they're not accusing, they're simply floating, always just out of reach. You can't hold them accountable because technically they never made a promise. They never said, "I love you." They never said, "We're exclusive." They never said, "I care." But they also never said, "They don't." So you stay, because of what might be, because of potential, because of moments that almost feel real. Those fragments of warmth, attention, or affection are just enough to keep you hoping, trying and waiting. Ambiguity control is so effective because it feels like your own uncertainty. You think the problem lies in your anxiety, your impatience, or your inability to go with the flow. But the truth is, you're not lost. You're being kept lost. And as long as you remain in the fog, they never have to reveal who they truly are. Value extraction framing. Value extraction framing is a psychological manipulation tactic where the manipulator positions every interaction, relationship, or exchange in terms of what you can offer and what they can gain. It's not about mutual benefit. It's about quietly conditioning you to measure your worth by your utility. The unspoken message is clear. You are only as valuable as what you provide. It starts subtly. They praise you for being helpful, selfless, or different from others. They say things like, "You always come through when I need you," or "I don't know what I'd do without you." At first, it feels flattering. You feel chosen, needed, even proud of your ability to fix, support, or sacrifice. But beneath the surface, a quiet truth takes hold. If I stop being useful, I stop being loved. This framing shifts the relationship dynamic entirely. You start anticipating their needs before your own. You overextend, overgive, overfunction, just to maintain your place in their life. You stop asking for what you need, afraid of seeming demanding or high maintenance. The manipulator doesn't need to say it outright. You've internalized the rule, your value is conditional. They reinforce it through subtle punishment. When you assert boundaries or say no, suddenly you're no longer the amazing friend. Partner or employee, you're difficult, cold, replaceable. They make you feel like a burden for needing rest, space, or recognition. And just like that, you scramble to prove your worth again, not through love, but through service. What makes value extraction framing especially destructive is how quiet it is. It doesn't scream abuse, it whispers unworthiness. You're never directly told you don't matter. Instead, you're slowly trained to believe your needs matter less than your function, that love must be earned through sacrifice, that peace is maintained by producing, fixing, pleasing, and performing. Over time, you begin to disappear, not all at once, but in small, quiet ways. You stop expressing yourself, stop being messy, stop being human. You become efficient, predictable, and emotionally available only when it's convenient for them. Meanwhile, they thrive, feeding off your effort, your energy, your silence, while you slowly forget that your value was never meant to be a transaction. Fear-then-relief technique. The fear-then-relief technique is a psychological manipulation tactic that jolts you with anxiety, panic, or dread, and then suddenly removes the threat to trigger emotional vulnerability, compliance, and gratitude. It doesn't just influence behavior, it hijacks your nervous system. It works because the moment fear is relieved, your brain floods with a chemical release, so powerful that you're more likely to trust, agree with, or obey the very person who scared you in the first place. This tactic begins with fear. It could be a threat, a lie, a misunderstanding, or a sudden moment of high tension. A boss says, "We need to talk about your job status right now." A partner says, "I can't do this anymore." A parent goes silent after you confess something vulnerable. The fear hits immediately. Your stomach drops, your breath quickens, your thoughts spiral, you brace for impact. And then, just as the fear peaks, it vanishes. "I was just kidding. It's not that serious. Don't worry, I was just testing you." That's the relief, and it's designed to make you emotionally collapse into the arms of the person who just made your heart race. In that instant, you're flooded with gratitude, not clarity. You don't question why they frightened you, or examine the manipulation. You just feel relief and a twisted sense of loyalty. The person who instilled the fear now feels like a savior, even though they were the source of the threat. This tactic is common in interrogation rooms, high-pressure sales, toxic relationships, and emotional abuse. The emotional roller coaster leaves you too disoriented to resist, too drained to argue. You comply not because it makes sense, but because you crave the fleeting safety they've conditioned you to associate with them. The danger of the fear-then-relief technique is its subtle dependence building. You begin linking your sense of peace to the person who took it away in the first place. Over time, you're not just tolerating danger, you're clinging to the illusion of safety, even when the very person who created the fear is the one you should be running from. Reverse mirroring. Reverse mirroring is a subtle but powerful psychological manipulation tactic in which the manipulator reflects you back to yourself, not to connect, but to blend in, disarm, and gain your trust. Unlike traditional mirroring, where someone imitates your gestures, tone, or energy to create rapport, reverse mirroring flips the script. The manipulator becomes exactly who you want them to be, not because it's who they are, but because it's how they get inside your mind. It begins with uncanny synchronicity. You share a passion and they seem to love it too. You voice a belief and they already feel the same way. Your humor, your wounds, your worldview, they mirror all of it. You're not just heard, you're seen. You begin thinking, no one has ever understood me like this. And that's precisely what they want you to believe. But beneath the surface, it's psychological camouflage. The manipulator isn't bonding with you. They're building a persona from your reflections. The more you open up, the more material they gather. Your language becomes their language. Your emotional rhythms become their mask. It feels like destiny. In reality, it's design. This tactic is devastatingly effective in romantic relationships, sales, cult grooming, and even seemingly genuine friendships. You bond quickly, trust faster than usual, and overlook red flags because this person feels familiar. But that familiarity is entirely constructed from everything you've revealed. They haven't shown you who they are. They've shown you who you are, reflected back through a polished, seductive mirror. The danger of reverse mirroring is how it builds false intimacy while keeping their true self completely hidden. You fall in love with a reflection, commit to someone who doesn't actually exist. When the mask eventually slips and their real behavior contradicts the identity they mirrored, you feel betrayed, confused, and even ashamed. You wonder, how could I have been so wrong? But you weren't wrong. You were targeted. The manipulator never showed up to be known. They showed up to be accepted, and the quickest way to earn your acceptance was to become a version of you. Not for love, not for connection, but for access, influence, and control. They didn't mirror you to get closer. They mirrored you so you'd never see who they really were. Social proof hoaxing. Social proof hoaxing is a psychological manipulation tactic that fabricates or exaggerates popularity, approval, or consensus to influence your beliefs, choices, and trust. It exploits one of the most powerful principles of human behavior. If others believe it, it must be true. But in this case, the others are illusions, carefully curated, selectively presented, or outright invented to make you question your instincts and follow a crowd that doesn't actually exist. It often begins subtly. The manipulator references vague people who agree with them. Everyone thinks I'm right, or my friends say you're overreacting. No one else has ever had a problem with me. These statements aren't facts, they're anchors. Your brain, wired for social survival, starts second-guessing itself. If you're the only one who sees the problem, maybe you are the problem. Maybe your perception is off. Maybe you're being unreasonable. But the truth is, there is often no everyone. There are no friends weighing in, no silent consensus. Just you doubting yourself because a lie was crafted to feel like evidence. Social proof hoaxing is especially effective in group settings or online environments. A manipulator might fake testimonials, reference anonymous support, or align themselves with authority figures who never actually endorse them. They may surround themselves with people who agree by default or punish dissent so harshly that silence becomes complicity. They don't need real credibility. They just need to appear backed by numbers. Once you believe they have the group behind them, standing your ground becomes difficult. You stay quiet to avoid being the outlier. You conform to avoid isolation. That's the goal, to make resistance feel socially dangerous. Over time, you may even begin parroting their narrative just to feel safe, just to belong, just to survive in a world where your truth feels outnumbered, even when it's the only truth that's real. Social proof hoaxing doesn't rely on facts. It relies on the fear of exclusion. And it works not because you're weak, but because humans were built to follow the crowd, even when the crowd is a ghost. False equivalence framing. False equivalence framing is a psychological manipulation tactic that twists logic by comparing two completely unlike things as if they carry the same weight, blame, or impact. It's not an argument. It's a trick, a way to blur moral lines, shift accountability, and make you feel as though you are just as guilty or flawed as the manipulator. It's the art of saying, well, you do it too, even when their actions cut deeper, hit harder, or cross boundaries you never touched. This tactic thrives in conflict. You confront someone for lying, and they respond, well, you kept secrets too. You call out manipulation, and they fire back, you're controlling sometimes, don't act like a saint. It sounds balanced, fair, reasonable, but it isn't. What they're doing isn't taking accountability. It's diluting it, twisting the situation until everything feels grey, until you can no longer distinguish the abuser from the victim. False equivalence is especially disorienting because it targets your empathy. You want to be fair. You are willing to own your flaws. So when someone flips the script, you pause, you look inward, and while you're busy questioning yourself, they slip away from the consequences of their actions. The more you bend to meet their skewed balance, the more power they regain. This tactic often appears in toxic relationships, where one person crosses a clear line, cheating, gaslighting, emotionally abusing, and then frames your reaction as equally harmful. You yelling at me is no better than me lying to you. Or, you left the room during the argument, that's abandonment too. The goal isn't reconciliation, it's neutralization. They ensure no one is held truly accountable, especially not them. What makes false equivalence framing so dangerous is how quickly it erodes your moral compass. You start believing that fairness means shared blame, even when one person clearly crossed the line. You soften your voice, hold back your truth, minimize your pain to appear bigger or more reasonable, and in doing so you let them off the hook. This isn't equality, it's emotional sabotage dressed up in the language of balance. They don't want to meet you halfway. They want to drag you down into the mud so they never have to climb out. And if you allow them to reframe your truth into something just as bad, they win, not because they're innocent, but because they convinced you that no one ever is. Artificial authority creation. Artificial authority creation is a psychological manipulation tactic where someone fabricates or exaggerates status, expertise, or credibility to gain control, obedience, and admiration, without having to earn it. It isn't about actually being qualified. It's about appearing powerful enough that others stop questioning, start obeying, and hand over trust they would never freely give if they knew the truth. This tactic works because humans are conditioned from childhood to respect authority. We are taught to listen to teachers, bosses, doctors, and leaders. So when someone enters your life with the right tone, the right title, the right image, your brain instinctively registers them as someone to defer to. A skilled manipulator knows exactly how to leverage that illusion. They may flash unverifiable credentials, reference vague experience, drop the names of influential people, or claim widespread respect in their field. They adopt the language of psychology, business, spirituality, or science to sound authoritative, even when what they say is shallow, misleading, or entirely fabricated. Their confidence becomes your evidence, and once you accept that authority, the power dynamic shifts. You stop challenging their opinions, start accepting their criticisms, and second-guess your own knowledge, even when you are right. This tactic thrives in toxic relationships, hierarchical workplaces, spiritual abuse, and predatory coaching or self-help environments. A manipulator wielding artificial authority might say things like, "Trust me, I know people like you. You wouldn't understand. I've studied this for years. I'm only telling you this because no one else will be honest with you." They don't provide facts. They provide a throne and sit on it, and before you realize it, the throne is made of air. What makes artificial authority creation so dangerous is how quickly it erodes your confidence. You stop trusting yourself. You defer, comply, obey. Even when your instincts scream that something feels wrong, you override them because surely someone with that much authority can't be manipulative, right? Real authority doesn't need to convince you. It doesn't need costumes, performance, or grandstanding. Only artificial authority does, because its power doesn't come from truth. It comes from the illusion of it. And it only works if you believe the crown is real. Empathy weaponization. Empathy weaponization is one of the most insidious psychological manipulation tactics because it turns your greatest strength, your ability to care, feel, and understand, against you. It's the deliberate exploitation of your compassion to excuse harmful behavior, avoid accountability, or keep you emotionally ensnared. It doesn't shatter your heart all at once. It uses your heart to dismantle your boundaries piece by piece. The manipulator doesn't yell or demand. They suffer. They cry. They shut down. They recount their trauma, their pain, their tragic past at moments when they should be taking responsibility. When you confront them about how they've hurt you, they pivot. You have no idea what I've been through. I'm trying my best. I wish you could understand how hard it is for me. Suddenly, you are the one comforting them. The pain they caused you is sidelined because now you feel guilty for making them feel bad. This tactic is so effective because it exploits your humanity. You don't want to be cruel. You want to understand. So you give them the benefit of the doubt. You excuse their aggression, their neglect, their betrayal, telling yourself they didn't mean it. They're hurting. They're trying. Gradually, you stop expecting accountability. You begin sacrificing for someone who never truly intends to change. Empathy weaponization isn't just emotional manipulation, it's emotional inversion. You, the one being harmed, become the caretaker, the fixer, the protector of someone who keeps dropping emotional bombs and handing you the guilt for the explosion. It makes walking away feel not just painful, but heartless. Setting a boundary feels cold. Asking for respect feels selfish. And the more you give, the more they take because they know you cannot bear to be unkind. They don't need to overpower you. They only need to trigger your compassion, and you will silence, justify, and forgive for them. This tactic doesn't just trap you in a toxic relationship. It traps you in a war with your own empathy. You begin to question if being good means always forgiving, even when it's destroying you. And that is precisely how they maintain control, not with force, but by weaponizing your own goodness against you.